I was assigned as a security guard with the midnight shift at a very large Omaha warehouse when I was a young man. This building was mainly used for storage and it was huge. We as security personnel were tasked with hitting several stations inside this building on the night shift, and this required that we did a lot of walking. There would always be 2 personnel assigned to the warehouse at night, one patrolling the outside perimeter in a car, and one inside the warehouse on foot. Being outside, sitting in the comfort of a car, was obviously the more desirable of the two. I was working a Wednesday night. I was about half an hour into my shift. I would start the shifts walking around for about an hour, just surveilling the place before sitting down in one of the security offices. This room had some low-budget, ancient camera system that at the time was impressive technology, but it only had 2 screens because there were only 2 cameras in the entire warehouse, one in the northeast corner and one in the southwest corner. That's why we couldn't just sit on our butts in the security office our entire shifts and had to actually patrol the place. This was a shared warehouse for some tech companies, and a lot of expensive equipment was held here, hence why 2 security guards would have to be there every single night. The warehouse layout was similar to that of a regular grocery store. There were like 10 to 15 aisles, and one intersecting aisle that cuts between the other 10 to 15 in the middle. I was still making my initial rounds around the place, when I saw all the way down at the end of the aisle I was in, something at the end section. It was like this white thing that kind of resembled the shape of a head, and it was poking out from behind the end section. Mind you, it was so far away that all I could make from it was this white-looking object. I elevated my slow stroll to a moderately quick speed walk, and halfway through the aisle, the white thing disappeared behind the tower of boxes. This confirmed my fear that it was a person, and that I wasn't alone in there. I now ran to the end of the aisle, hoping to see the other night guard walking around or something. As I stood in the southwest corner of this giant warehouse, I looked up at the camera in the corner, and I was pointing in the direction of the thing I just saw. I looked in that direction, and there it was again, at maybe the 7th aisle, that white thing I saw earlier. Now it was a lot closer, and I could make it out to be someone's face, as I feared. But it wasn't the other security guard. It was this extremely pale, ghoulish-looking face. They once again slowly hid their face behind the tower of boxes. I walkie-talkied the other guard on duty, and he radioed back that he was in the car by the back section of the parking lot. He said roger that, he'd be here in 5. Getting off the phone with him, I was nervous to approach the aisle that I saw the person's head. Even though this is exactly what a security guard's purpose and job is, you never actually expect or anticipate seeing any action. I took a deep breath and ran to that aisle and stopped at the end of it to look down it. The person wasn't in sight. I figured they must have ran for it. So I ran halfway down hoping to catch up to them, but I stopped when I smelt this horrible putrid odor. It smelled like a dead, rotting carcass. I followed the scent until it became overwhelming and I found the source of it. It was coming from this big wooden box that was different from the rest of the boxes. I pulled the lid off the box, and inside was a dead body laying in a pool of blood. The most shocking part of it was that it was missing a head. I walkie-talkied to the other security guard again, and yelled at him to call the police and report a dead body in the warehouse. I said this all while running as fast as I could to the back exit of the warehouse, struggling to get enough air. I threw up the second I made it out the door. I ran to the other security guard's car and sat in there with him gasping for air. He was still on the phone with the police, so I took the phone and told them whatever the other security guy didn't. Given the nature of the situation, they sent like 5 or 6 cop cars and basically had the entire place surrounded. The body was loaded into an ambulance, and for a good chunk of the night, police were in the warehouse doing forensic work. Perhaps the weirdest part of all of this was that when trying to go back to the video footage captured from the night before, the footage cut out for about 3 hours in the middle of the night. There was no explanation for this happening. I've thought about this night for almost my entire life, basically. I don't believe in ghosts or anything, but I don't really have an explanation for this. I've thought about some far-fetched possibilities, though, like that whoever the murderer was in the warehouse that night and was holding up the severed head of that body, hence why it looks so pale and ghoulish. In fact, it gave me chills just now thinking about it again. Several years ago, 2 friends and I heard from a mutual friend about this creepy abandoned warehouse or furniture store that was only a few miles from my house. One night while on a drive, the 3 of us decided to check it out. We parked at a Walgreens a few hundred yards from the warehouse and started walking towards it. As we got closer, my friend, I'll call him Jim, kinda chickened out and stayed back while me and my other friend, I'll call Mark, continued on. As we approached the right side of the building, it became very obvious that this place had been abandoned for a very long time. The front entrance was boarded up, and there were vines and ivy growing all over the building. Our mutual friend said that the only way in was through a busted-in wall in the back. We went around back, and sure enough, there was a broken-in narrow section of wall we could get in through. We stepped in, and it was completely dark. We couldn't see our hands in front of our faces, so we turned on the flashlights on our phones and looked around. There was trash and debris everywhere on the concrete floors. We were in what appeared to be the main room of the old store, and it was huge. An entire football field could probably fit in this room. We could even hear an echo when we talked. We started looking along the walls, which were covered in graffiti. The graffiti was littered with what must have been gang symbols as well as profanity, as you would expect. What was really unsettling, though, was that as we moved further along the back wall, the graffiti was getting more and more disturbing. One of them read, "Kill yourself tonight." Then the graffiti was getting satanic. There were tons of inverted crosses, pentagrams, 666s, and violent scenes depicted. While this stuff was creepy enough, it wasn't the worst of what we saw. Towards the end of the building, there were some steps leading to smaller rooms. As we shone our lights on the steps, we saw a large, dry pool of what was probably blood all over the steps. This deterred us from exploring the smaller rooms beyond, so we headed to the left side of the room. As we were walking, our lights caught something hanging from the ceiling. We got closer and saw what it was. It was a noose, still hanging from one of the rafters. It became very obvious that the people that come to this place use it for very evil purposes. After that, we decided we'd spend enough time in there and headed for the hole in the wall we entered through. We got outside and saw that there was another, smaller building/warehouse behind the main one. Despite the freaky things we saw inside, we were still curious and decided to check this one out too. One thing that was very odd was that there was a small room in the front of the warehouse that had no doors, only one window. Inside was a large inverted cross hanging from the decrepit ceiling. We came to the left side of the warehouse where the large garage-style entrance was. This building was similar to the first one. It was one large empty room with tons of trash everywhere. There was more disturbing graffiti. However, there were these holes at the base of the walls that were really odd-looking. We shined our lights down them but couldn't see the bottom. What were these for? We had seen enough at this point and headed back outside. It was then that my friend Mark got a call from Jim. As he was talking to Jim, his face suddenly changed to a downright horrified expression. I said, "What's wrong?" What he said next sent a chill down my spine. "Someone else is here," he said. Before we could even turn to run, a white truck peeled around the corner at an alarming speed, heading right towards us. We started booking it towards my car, and as we got around the other back corner of the building, we saw another black truck parked alongside. But we kept running as fast as we could, and thankfully the three of us made it back to my car. We got in and peeled out of there. I don't know what those guys in the trucks were there for, or why they chased after us, but based on what we saw in those buildings, it wasn't anything good. Thankfully, we never found out, and we never returned to that place. In my mid-20s, I used to be a party planner and event coordinator. I was basically in charge of throwing dope parties for this record label group. I'd have to rent out venues for a night or weekends, which would allow us to host our events in these places. Usually we wouldn't pay until after the event, and the landlord or owner of whatever property we were using would take a cut of the profits. There was this one time that my group rented this big warehouse for an entire weekend, and we would be hosting parties Friday and Saturday night. Once the place was rented out, I had to do a lot of setting up, which included setting up tables for bottle service, setting up portable bars, and a DJ stand. A lot of work would go into these kinds of pop-up venues, but they were always extremely profitable. My buddy Jack, who was also on the event planning team, was helping me on the Wednesday before the party weekend. He drove a truck full of equipment to the empty parking lot that the warehouse sat in. I was having trouble figuring out how to get the power to a certain part of the warehouse activated. I looked for any kind of electrical panel or circuit breaker box, but I was having trouble finding one. I gave the building owner I dealt with a call, and he picked up almost right away. His name's Carter. He told me exactly where to go for the electrical panel that would turn on the specific lights I was looking for. He directed me to a door that had an exit sign on top of it, but it wasn't on. Through this door, I was in a very short, very narrow space with a door on one side which I presume led to the outside, and then a half flight of stairs on the other side. I was supposed to go down this half flight of stairs, which led to another tight space with a couple doors. This room was hard to explain without just seeing it for yourself. I'm 6'4", so I had to bend down a little bit just so my head wouldn't hit the ceiling. That's how cramped it was down there. This level had very dim nightlight kind of lights hung on the ceiling. Dim but enough light to navigate just fine. I found the electrical panel, and Carter told me exactly which switches to flip. Then I shut the panel door and turned the key to lock it, even though he told me to just leave the key in the lock. I thanked him and our call ended. I heard a loud and obvious buzzing sound that would be going off in spasms. I followed the sound of it to a door leading to a pitch-black room. Pulling the door open was hard as it scraped against the concrete floor. There was this red light in the top corner of the room that synchronized with the buzzing sound. When the buzzing stopped, the light would also turn off. I was trying to figure out what it was, but it didn't make sense. I stepped deeper into the room and noticed whenever I moved, the light would turn on and the buzzing would sound. When I stood still, it stopped. I don't know why, but I was creeped out, so I went back to the doorway of the room. I took one more look inside, and the red light turned on again, lighting up the room with this eerie red glow. I decided to call Carter and tell him about the potential problem with the light and the buzzing. He told me calmly that the light was a motion sensor, and the buzzing was because that one in the basement was busted. I asked what he meant by motion sensor, and he explained that there's at least one in every room in the building, as it's part of the security system. I looked back into the room, and the light was still on. I asked what could be setting it off in there, and he said he had no idea. And that's when I spotted it. There was someone, I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman because of the long, disheveled hair, sitting in one corner of this room, half hidden behind a pile of old boxes. Their eyes were the most noticeable feature because of how goddamn wide they were open. The mouth was like a half smile, and they were moving their arm in a manner that was as if to tell me to come here. I know it took me a few seconds to describe this person just now, but I was literally screaming at the sight of them in under a second. I slammed that door shut and ran back up the stairs and out that exit door. I told Carter we were leaving and not using the warehouse anymore. I didn't ask any more questions after that. I didn't care, it was his problem. I yelled at Jack to get everything he could back into the truck. We collected our stuff as quickly as possible, loaded the truck back up, and left. I didn't even bother locking the door to the warehouse. I just wanted to be far away from there. I still today don't know what to make of it. The Carter guy seemed so weirdly calm about Mike telling him about a deranged-looking person in the basement of his warehouse. Thinking back, that light was probably going off because of that person sitting in the corner waving me over, or doing whatever the hell he or she was doing with their arm. It was a truly nightmare-inducing, horrible experience. I'll be the first to admit that I'm one of the most skeptical people I know. I don't believe in ghosts or any other paranormal stuff. I'm quick to dismiss stories that seem fake, or at the very least fabricated. That's why I'm completely at a loss for words at what happened to me just weeks ago. I wanted to write all of this while it was fresh in my mind. I can't explain what happened to me, and to be honest, I'm still terrified. I thought to myself, maybe if I write what happened to me and share it with the internet, maybe someone out there can explain what happened. Well, hopefully somebody out there can explain. My friend Steve and his wife were going out of town for the weekend for their anniversary. The two of them don't travel alone a lot because they have 2 children and a dog. I know for some people that's a first world problem, and you're correct, but Steve isn't struggling financially. He built this massive home in the middle of nowhere because he likes privacy, and if you're fortunate enough to do that, I can't blame you. Well, for Steve and his wife, the stars were about to align perfectly. The 2 kids were going out of town for some type of school trip, so they were going to be alone with just the dog. When Steve told me all of this, I insisted on going over and watching the dog for the weekend so he and his wife could go on a romantic weekend getaway. He agreed, and the plan was set in stone. I would be watching his beautiful golden retriever for the weekend. I made my way to the house on Friday afternoon. I didn't work weekends, so I planned on just staying there Friday through Sunday. Steve stocked the house full of food and snacks for me and made sure I had everything I needed. It was a bit overkill for a weekend pet sitting job, but I wasn't complaining. I love dogs and I love quiet weekends, so win-win for me. Now for the scary part. On Friday night, the dog and I just hung out and watched movies. Steve sent me a text around 9 p.m. and said, "Don't get scared being all alone in that house. It can get pretty spooky at night when you're by yourself." I gave him a single LOL text back and told him to shut up. As I said before, I'm a very skeptical person. I don't get scared of empty houses or being alone in the middle of nowhere. I'm well aware that anything can happen, so I just don't get scared easily. I slept in the spare bedroom, and Steve's dog came with me. We went to bed around 1 a.m. At 3:21 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of the dog barking downstairs. It was that loud and vicious barking. I won't lie, that actually did scare me. But more of the surprise scare, not that scared out of my skin kind of scare. I made my way downstairs, and the entire time, the dog never stopped barking. I finally found the dog in the kitchen barking at the door that led to the basement. All the hair on his back was standing straight up, and the dog looked incredibly spooked by something. I was calling his name and trying to calm him down, but he just wouldn't stop barking. I grabbed the doorknob, and this sent the dog into a spiral. He was now running back and forth barking and just going insane. Of course, my first thought was maybe some kind of intruder in the basement. Possible, but unlikely. Steve has all that super fancy security equipment, so breaking in is not something that's easy. I grabbed a big knife from the kitchen and opened the door. The dog ran to the doorway but didn't go down into the basement. He just stood at the frame and growled, his hair still sticking straight up. I turned the light on and descended the stairs. I started yelling a bunch of stuff, pretending to be a lot tougher than I am, but I heard or saw nothing down there. I tried calling the dog down into the basement, but he wasn't moving. I even went as far as to look all around the basement to give my mind some peace. It's a finished basement, so I looked in closets in every corner, behind furniture, and even in the bathroom that's down there. No intruder and no evil ghosts. The only thing I did notice was how unreasonably cold it was down there. I know it's a basement, but I've been down there a million times, and it's not that cold. Even in the dead of winter, it's never that cold. At the end of the day, a cold basement is no reason to freak out and run away. I spent the rest of the night in the living room. It took a while, but the dog finally calmed down, and we both fell asleep again. The next day, the dog was completely fine. We played outside for a while, and I just spent most of the day listening to music and watching movies. I went down in the basement at one point during the day, and the temperature was completely normal. It felt like the rest of the house. I didn't really spend much time giving it thought, and just went about the rest of the day. That night, I decided to stay on the couch, just in case the dog had another basement door incident. I wanted to stay up later, but I ended up falling asleep while watching a movie. Once again, at almost the exact same time, I woke up to the dog throwing a fit and barking like the house was on fire or something. I stormed into the kitchen, and again, I tried getting the dog to stop barking, but he wouldn't listen for the second night in a row. But this night was different. I didn't think it was possible, but the dog was even more erratic that night than he was on the previous night. I knew nothing was down there, so I told him repeatedly that it was okay. It was like I wasn't even there. When I grabbed the doorknob this time, instead of continuing to bark, he started to cry and whimper. It was the strangest thing. I let go of the knob, and when I tried to console the dog, he started barking again. I was annoyed and confused. One last time, I grabbed the knob and went downstairs. Again, the dog started to cry and still wouldn't follow me into the basement. This time was different. It was still cold down there, just like the previous night, but this time it stunk so badly. I don't know how to describe the smell other than just bad, but perhaps the weirdest thing was that some of the pictures he had on the wall of his family were knocked over, and the bar stools down there were also knocked to the ground. Other than that, nothing else was misplaced or destroyed. I picked up the bar stools and also the pictures and just set them on the bar. The smell was so overbearing that I didn't even want to be down there anymore. I went back upstairs, and for the first 30 minutes or so, the dog continued to bark, and I tried to figure out what could be the reason for the smell. When the dog finally calmed down, I gave him a treat and we both fell asleep. When I woke up in the morning, I went into the basement to try to get to the bottom of the smell, but the smell was gone, not even a lingering odor. Also, the dog followed me down, and he was happy as can be. For 2 nights, that dog refused to come into the basement with me, but today, he went down there without a care in the world. I was completely stumped. I had no clue what had happened the previous 2 nights. Steve got home around 1 in the morning, and as you may expect, his dog was jumping for joy. His wife took the dog outside, and I started catching up with Steve for a bit. He asked how everything was, and I told him that, for the most part, everything was great. He gave me a confused look when I said for the most part, so I explained in detail what happened over the weekend. I totally expected him to laugh and assume I was playing a joke on him, but he didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just stood there. He finally looked down and told me that, occasionally, when the dog was a puppy, he would have these barking fits and just go crazy barking at that door. Apparently, he hadn't done it in years, so Steve forgot about it. They never knew the reason, but then one night, he just stopped doing it. I could tell Steve was freaked out, a lot more freaked out than I was. We talked about it for a little longer, but ultimately, I kept telling Steve not to worry, and it's probably nothing. It's been 2 weeks, and I have not been able to stop thinking about it. Steve told me that since they've been home, the dog has been completely normal and has had no basement door episodes. I've tried looking into it myself, but I haven't found anything that could logically explain what happened. Just when I think I may have found something that sort of explains what happened, once I add everything up, it doesn't make sense. So what's the deal? Can someone out there explain to me why that dog was acting this way? What was the smell, and where did it come from? I need help, people. I'm losing sleep, and I don't even live in that house. I just want some sort of answer. I don't know if this is considered your typical scary story, but it's definitely freaky and very unnerving. The more time that's gone by, the scarier it becomes for me. I'd love to share it and see what people think. It was a few years ago now. I had just broken up with my boyfriend and moved into this cute little apartment. It was an entire apartment complex. The complex itself was beautiful, quiet, and elegant. I quickly made friends with neighbors and several of the other tenants. It was just a nice and friendly little community. A few months into my lease, I thought I heard the sound of running coming from the hallway one night when I was getting ready for bed. I looked out the peephole of the door, but didn't see anything. There weren't any kids in my building, so I couldn't imagine who would be running at that hour, but strange things happen, so I didn't question. The next few nights, I heard the sound again. I didn't get up and look because it just didn't seem that important to me at the time. It's worth noting that my apartment is on the ground level, and my windows face a beautiful courtyard. The door to the apartment is still inside the building, and you need a key to get into the building. It took a little while to get used to the windows being at ground level at first, because if you wanted to, you could come right up to my bedroom window. I will say that I wasn't worried about anybody in this community doing that. I'm just stating that it was something on my mind when I first moved in. However, that information is about to become relevant, because one night, I woke up to what sounded like giggling outside my bedroom window. It was weird for sure, but I just figured some kids were acting stupid and hanging out too close to my window. I tapped the window glass and made a loud shushing noise. The giggling stopped for just a second, and then a faint tapping sound could be heard on the other side of the glass. It freaked me out, but I wasn't about to let some kids have that satisfaction over me. Once I composed myself, I grabbed the curtain and whipped it open. There was nobody there. I was looking at the quiet night courtyard and nothing more. Even if some kids were out there, I have no idea where they would have gone that fast. I closed the curtain and shrugged it off. I wasn't about to let some kids ruin my sleep. This weird giggling outside my window continued for a few nights. I just learned to ignore it. I have young nieces and nephews, and usually when I ignore their stupid pranks, they stop doing whatever they're doing. That was my plan with these giggling kids. I assumed that if I just stopped acknowledging them, they would stop trying to mess with me, and unless they gave me a reason to report them, I wasn't going to bother the apartment complex manager with this. I think it was 2 days later while I was at work that I received an email from the complex manager. She seemed short in the email. She asked if I could stop at the main office when I got home from work. She had to show me something and she claimed it was urgent. I told her I could stop by after work. I remember all day long being stressed about it. I was worried my rent money didn't clear or something like that. When I showed up, she told me to lock the door. She started talking quietly, almost in a whisper. This one guy who works in the security office came in and sat next to me. The manager told me that while the security guard was monitoring some footage, he came across this. She showed me security camera footage of the hallway where my apartment is located. Around 2 in the morning, 2 small hooded figures approached my door. They looked about the size of children who were maybe around 10 or 12. They were just standing there in the grainy footage. It looked like they were standing about an inch away from the door. The scariest part of this was that when she fast-forwarded the footage, they didn't move at all. It was nearly 10 minutes of them just standing extremely close to my apartment door. Before they finally walked away, one of the small figures reached for the doorknob and tried opening the door. You can clearly see them jostling the door a few times, but it doesn't open. After the 10 minutes in the video, they skip away from the sight of the camera. I was finally freaked out. Whoever these kids were, they were targeting me for some reason. I told the security officer and the manager about the window incident, but when they looked back at the footage, they found nothing. We still called the police and gave them a statement. They said if anything else happens, give them a call, but at that point, there really was nothing they could do. The security officer attempted to see if they could find out where the kids skipped off to when they left my apartment door, but it's almost like they vanished. They couldn't find them on any other camera on the entire complex. The next night, I decided to stay awake. I was going to catch these kids one way or another. But that night, there was nothing. No giggles and no sounds from the hall. It was about a week later, and I heard something coming from the hall. It was about 1:30 in the morning. I muted the TV and listened intently. I heard the sound of my doorknob rattling around. It was happening. The kids were back at my door. I ran over nervously and yelled for them to get away. I could hear a child laughing, and then another soft child voice whisper, "Mom, we're home. Just open the door and let us in." I didn't say anything. I looked through the peephole and just saw 2 small figures with their heads down. The voice whispered again, "Please let us in. We're home now. Please." That last please that the child said almost sounded desperate. I didn't care. I yelled that their mother doesn't live here anymore and that I was going to call the cops. Both kids started to giggle. Then the doorknob started to shake again. One of the kids started throwing their body into the door, but it wouldn't budge. I stood there holding the door for a minute. I didn't hear laughing anymore, and the doorknob wasn't shaking. When I looked one last time, nobody was out there. I was still too afraid to open the door, just in case they were just outside of my view. I called the police, and the cops were quick to assume it was just local kids playing a prank on me. I didn't argue with that because it seemed like the most logical explanation. I finished with my statement, and that was that. A few days later, I ran into the apartment manager in the parking lot. She pulled me aside and asked if I had experienced anything since that last time. I told her no, and that I was sure it was just some local kids. She made a weird face and told me she wasn't so sure. She told me that the woman who lived in the apartment before me was strange. She didn't give me a whole bunch of information for privacy reasons, but she was fairly confident that something horrible happened with that woman's children. She didn't elaborate or give any details. She didn't even give me the name. She just implied that something horrible happened and left it at that. She said that she had already said too much and she didn't want to get into trouble for sharing personal information. She told me to be careful and just keep locking my doors. I'll never forget her walking away saying, "This wasn't a prank." To my knowledge, I don't think those kids ever visited my apartment again while I was there. I've spent some time trying to figure out exactly what happened, like who these kids were and what the apartment manager meant. Was she implying that these kids were like ghosts or something? I know that seems insane, and I'm sure that's not what it is, but you have to admit, it is strange. It's weird to me that the police and the security officer couldn't find where these kids went after they left my apartment. Something that dawned on me after I had already moved out was something I had overlooked. There should have been no way for the kids to get inside the apartment building without a key. As I said before, there were no kids that lived in my specific building. So how did they get in? Where did they go? As time goes on and I reflect on this story, I get more freaked out. It's amazing to me that I wasn't more scared in the moment. I'm years removed and don't even live there anymore, and I'm more scared today writing this than I was when I experienced it. I still don't believe in ghosts or anything paranormal, but I can't explain exactly what it was. Neighborhood kids are the easy solution, but the more I replay the memories in my head, the more impossible that seems. I know how this story sounds, but I think it's worth sharing. Maybe I really did have an experience with something not from this world. This story I'm about to share happened to me around 10 years ago. It's without a doubt one of the most terrifying things that's ever happened to me. I recently stopped telling people this story because most of the time people tell me I'm lying or making it up. It was my wife who pushed me to write this down and share it. She said maybe somebody out there has gone through a similar experience, so here it is. Back then, I worked at a dead-end job. Just like most of us, it was a way to make ends meet. The mundane drag of retail work was beginning to drain the life from me. One afternoon, when I was leaving work, I noticed something neon pink hanging from my car door handle. It was a sticky note with a friendly message written. It simply said, "You're special, and I hope you have an amazing day." It also had a smiley face sticker attached to the note. I thought it was nice and it made me smile. Other than that, I didn't give it another thought at that moment. The next few days, when I left work, I would have a message attached to a note in the same spot. I know some people have told me that it's creepy and weird, but I liked the attention. At that point in my life, I wasn't getting attention very often, so it was nice to be seen. After 3 or 4 friendly messages, I decided I was going to leave a message on my door this time. When I parked for work that morning, I grabbed my own sticky notes and wrote a message. I kept things friendly, while also walking that line of being a little flirtatious. When I left work that afternoon, I was happy to find another note. The flirt worked because this person started flirting right back. I didn't know if this was a joke or if it was serious, but either way, I kept the charade going for a few days. The shift before I had a day off, I left a note saying something along the lines of, "Don't miss me too much on my day off." When I left work, I had a sticky note that just had a sad face drawn on it. This is where I thought the game would end for good. Somebody was having fun with me, I gave in, and now that I was going to be off, I figured it would just fizzle out. I couldn't have been more wrong. When I woke up the next day, I did some stuff around the house. It was late morning when I went outside for the first time. I noticed something neon pink on the car door again. I couldn't believe my eyes. I tentatively approached the note. It said, "You look cute when you're sleeping." This scared me. After a little while, I concluded that someone was messing with me. It clearly was someone I worked with who knew where I lived. It was the only thing that made sense to me. I crumpled the note up and threw it away. When I returned to work, the notes continued for a few days. They started friendly, but by the 3rd day of my not responding anymore, they started to get mean. The friendly messages were now saying things like, "You better answer me," and "Remember, I know where you live." I thought about calling the police, but I was still so sure that it was somebody I knew messing with me. I decided to leave a note the next morning. I wrote a message saying to leave me alone, or I would call the police. I didn't really have plans to call the police, but if it were really somebody I knew, I thought that this would be when they finally came forward, or at least stopped with the notes. When I left work that afternoon, I noticed that my note was gone, and for the first time in a while, I had no new notes on my door. I felt relieved. I still wanted to know who it was, but if the notes stopped, I was happy. That night, I woke up at some point in the middle of the night because I thought I heard something. Ever since the note outside, I was on edge. I sat in bed for a minute, just sitting silently, trying to listen. Then I heard something again. It sounded a little like shuffling, but it was hard to tell if it was just the house making noises or if it was something more alarming. I assumed I was just hearing things, but I wasn't taking any chances. I grabbed a baseball bat and made my way down the long hallway from my bedroom to the open living room. Every step I took, I started thinking the worst. If a person were standing in my house, I don't think I would have been able to hit them with the bat I was holding. I just am not that type of person. I made it to the end of the hallway and just stopped. Whatever bravery I had when I left my room was gone. If you're standing at the end of the hall, you can see my living room, dining room, and kitchen. I turned on the dimmable lights and scanned the room from where I was standing. I was too scared to move any further. I kept imagining somebody hiding behind the couch or something. I stood in silence for a minute or so, and I heard nothing. I turned the lights off and briskly walked back to the bedroom. At any point, I expected somebody to charge after me, but thankfully that didn't happen. I locked my bedroom door and turned on the TV. I wanted to drown out the noise of nothingness. I ended up falling asleep eventually. When I woke up that morning, I almost forgot about how scared I was. I walked to the fridge to grab some juice, and that's when I saw it. A bright pink sticky note was stuck to the fridge that said, "You can't keep me away," with another smiley face attached after that statement. After being frozen for about 30 seconds, I ran to check every door and window in my house, and they all were still locked. I know for a fact that nobody had a key to my house. My family lives in another state, and I'm not close enough with anyone here to trust them with a key. Somehow, this person got inside my house and left a message on the fridge. I wasn't playing around anymore. I called the police and gave them the info. They claimed to have done an investigation, but they weren't able to get any useful information. Unfortunately, random notes were not a lot for them to go off of. At least that's what they said. They did try to check the cameras in the parking lot where I work, but where I park, the cameras don't reach. The employee parking spaces are on the side of the store, and there are no cameras there. The police concluded that it had to be someone who knew me. I would have agreed if it were not for the note inside my house. I'm a freak when it comes to locking my door, so I know that nobody had access to getting inside the house. I stayed at a friend's house for a couple nights just because I wasn't ready to sleep at my place yet. We ended up going to the hardware store and bought all new locks for the doors. That first night back at my place, my friend stayed over with me, and nothing happened that night. A few months had gone by, and nothing happened. No new notes at work, and nothing at my house. It was over 2 months later when I left for work one morning, and I noticed one of the horrible pink notes on my front door. I grabbed the note, and it said, "I guess you don't want to play anymore." I called the police right away, but they didn't do much. I invested in cameras after that, but nothing ever happened again. Changing the locks in my house might have saved my life. Somehow this person had to have had a key to my house. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. What I can't figure out is why me, and who was that person? Whenever I think back about that entire situation, I almost get sick. I think back to the night I heard something inside the house. There had to have been a person hiding somewhere, just inches or feet from where I was standing. Why didn't they harm me then? I wonder if messing around with me was all this person wanted. A friend once told me that when I went back to the room and locked the door, it's possible that this person tried to get into the room, but locking the door may have saved my life. It's been 10 years and nothing has happened since that last note. I have since moved and I'm married now. Every time I see those stupid pink sticky notes, I always think back to that horrible experience. Whatever the case may be, I'm just happy I'm still here to tell the story. In 2010, I went to a summer camp called Camp Ernst that my parents signed me up for. Thankfully, it was with my best friend Keith, so I wouldn't be going there not knowing anyone. The camp was for 2 weeks, and it was the typical setting you'd expect to see in those old summer camp horror movies like Sleepaway Camp. There were 2 big cabins where the girls and boys slept respectively. There was also a big lodge-type building with an activity center, dining hall, and other amenities, and then various other smaller buildings scattered throughout the camp. Keith and I stayed up later than all the other kids because we wanted to play on our Nintendo DS's together. It was reaching the deep hours of the night, past 2 a.m. We were still playing DS together. That's when the door to the cabin opened. Panicking, we both threw our DS's under the pillows and pretended to be asleep. Footsteps moved around the room, from Keith's bed over to my bed. Then the footsteps stopped at my bed, and for a short moment, I felt the ever-so-soft feeling of someone breathing down my neck. Then the footsteps moved away from my bed and back to the door, before the door shut. I looked over to Keith and said, "That was scary." especially since whoever that was breathing down my neck. We went back to playing on our DSs. That's when I got a text message on my phone, which read, "Why are you two still up?" Those of us who had cell phones were given a list of phone numbers of the camp counselors who we should call if something were to happen. But that number didn't belong to any of the counselors. Not that I knew of, at least. I texted back saying, "Who is this?" They never responded, though. I told Keith, who didn't have a cell phone, and he was just as freaked out as I was. Obviously, it had to be a counselor. Or so we thought. So we went back to playing on our DSs with the screen brightness all the way down. We both heard the back door to the cabin open. We looked at each other and once again threw our DSs under the pillows. There were no more footsteps, though. Suddenly my phone vibrated. It was another text message from the same number. It said, "It's Counselor Tony. Come outside to the back of the cabin. I have something to say to you." I told Keith, and he said it sounded way too suspicious. Then we both wondered if whoever this Tony person was the one who just opened the back door. I got off the bed and took a few steps to the center of the room where I could get a view down the hall to the back door. There was no one in sight, so I walked down the hall a little bit. Keith didn't approve. When I got closer to the back screen door of the cabin, I realized there was a little section of wall that caved in, and in that little opening, there was someone hiding. I got a little closer and realized it was not a camp counselor, but some really old, creepy-looking man who was about the same height as me. I ran back to my bed screaming help, waking everybody up. It was at that moment that I heard the back door slam shut. A camp counselor came rushing inside through the front door, and I told everybody what just happened. The counselors went around the whole campsite, searching the perimeter for anyone matching the description I gave. It was a big place surrounded by forest, though. It would be impossible to find someone. What still doesn't make sense to me is how that man got my phone number. My best guess would be he somehow found a list of phone numbers that the counselors had made. But how did he know who I was? I still dream about this experience every now and then. I was just 13. It was my first and last year at a teenager summer camp, which was basically a traditional summer camp for teens aged 13 to 16. The place had some history, though. An old woman who worked on the grounds died from reasons not disclosed to the public. The old woman was one of the former cafeteria workers, Miss Graham. Well, I'll keep this short. It was one of those nights that my brain just hated me and was basically telling me, "You're not getting any sleep tonight." I was rolling from side to side in an uncomfortable cot as everyone else was fast asleep. The full moon made for a bright night. Beams of light literally poured into the room from every window. I was so far from tired that I just felt defeated. I sat up and rubbed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I noticed the light from the window straight across from me was blocked by something. I gasped when I saw what was blocking the light. It was a person's head. It looked like an older woman with a red cap on. What the hell is this lady doing? I thought to myself. It didn't really hit me hard until I realized the woman was looking right at me. Like her eyes were locked onto mine. When I saw this, I flipped on my side and pretended to be asleep. Or maybe I just wanted to hide under the covers like a baby. I gave it a minute before I dared look back at the window. She was gone. I breathed a sigh of relief. The room seemed darker now, though. Something wasn't right. I looked up to the window right above my cot, and 3 feet away from me, at most, there was the same older woman in a red cap, looking straight down at me. Once again, I covered myself with the blankets and cowered in fear. I don't know how long I stayed like that before I actually fell asleep, because the next thing I remember is going to one of the adults running the camp and telling them about the woman with the red cap. He looked at the 2 women who were also in his office, and they looked back at him with disturbed faces. One of the women said, That's so creepy. That sounds exactly like Miss Graham." As she said that, my heart skipped a beat. To this day, I don't know if what I saw at that window was a real person, if it was in my head, or if by some off chance, maybe it was Miss Graham out there. I'll never forget the time I went to a sleepaway camp in Pennsylvania. I was a little kid at the time, and I was very shy. Meeting all the other kids at the orientation on the first day was a scary experience for me. I'd rather be home playing Super Nintendo or something. Some of the other kids made friends pretty quickly. I thought I wasn't going to make any friends, but luckily some really outgoing kids started talking to me early on. I can't for the life of me remember his name though, so I'll call him Mike. Mike was a short blonde kid who always wore a Yankees hat. I thought he was the coolest kid at the time, but looking back now, I realize he's probably one of those kids who turned into a punk troublemaker in high school. During the tour of the campgrounds the first day, Mike and I picked up on a lone bunk building that looked like it had been abandoned and unused for years. We asked one of the counselors what happened. He said he had no idea. It was his first week working there. All he knew was that it hadn't been used for years. On the last night of camp, we were in our bunks. Everyone was getting ready to go to sleep. Mike came up to me and whispered something in my ear. He wanted to sneak over to that abandoned bunk just for the fun of it and see what's inside. I wanted to seem cool to Mike since I, for whatever reason, looked up to him, so I agreed. When everyone was asleep, we went outside and kept close to the bunk. We waited until the lights in the counselors' bunks were out, which wasn't long since it was already late. Then we ran down the pavement leading through the counselors' bunks towards the abandoned bunk building. My heart was racing the whole time. I wasn't built to be doing mischievous things like this, not at that age at least. Mike led the way until we were by the door of the abandoned bunk. The front door was boarded up, which is one of the reasons why it caught our attention initially anyway. So we had to go through one of the windows, which, wouldn't you know it, there was one that was completely busted open already. We climbed into the abandoned bunk. Now these buildings were pretty big. They weren't little shacks like you might be picturing. Each bunk had room for at least 10 campers. This one was no exception. Mike and I stood in the dark bunk. It was kind of cold in there. We had our arms out in front of us to make sure we didn't walk into anything. I walked into a bunk bed numerous times, and I heard Mike doing the same. I stopped to listen to what Mike was doing, and I heard bouncing on one of the beds. "Shh, stop messing around," I told him. I assumed he was hopping up and down on one of the old bunk beds, but Mike's voice came from the complete opposite side of the room, as I remember he said, "That's not me, I thought that was you." We had nothing to use as a light source, so we were in a pitch black room in a building that hadn't been used for years, and all we heard was the sound of someone bouncing up and down on a squeaky mattress. Needless to say, we freaked out and ran for the window we entered from. It was tiny though, so it took a while to get out. While I was waiting for Mike to get out, the bouncing sound stopped, and there was a loud thump sound. Whoever was bouncing on that bed must have jumped off. I jumped up to the window, and as I crawled through, I felt 2 hands grab onto my foot and try to pull me back in. But I was already out the window. We ran back to our bunk and locked the door. We contemplated running to the head counselor's bunk to tell them, but we figured we didn't want to get in trouble. Yes, looking back, that was a stupid decision, but we got through the night okay and went home the next day, living to tell the story another day. So this happened on a camping trip with my girlfriend Alicia, my best friend Rodney, and his girlfriend Amanda. My dad told me about a perfect place to go camping right by a big lake surrounded by dense forest.
A trail from a nearby parking lot would lead straight to the lake. His directions were straightforward, and it was actually easy to get to the lake. We got there as the sun was on its way down and the sky was turning that beautiful orange. The lake was calming, and the sound of the breeze hitting the leaves was peaceful. We had our tent set up, and there was still a hint of orange in the sky, though it was very dark in the woods by now. There was a slight orange reflection on the calm lake. It was very warm out, and Amanda suggested we all jump in the water. I was kind of up for it, as my dad said it would be perfect to jump in. For that reason, we all brought towels. The girls seemed more eager than Rodney and I, though. The two got into their underwear and walked into the lake, exclaiming it was actually warm. I told them I'd go in after setting up the campfire at least, since we had already gathered some wood. Starting the fire proved to be especially difficult for me, because I just couldn't get the wood to catch. I'm not exactly a Boy Scout. Rodney took over, and as I watched him try to start the fire, one of the girls started screaming and flailing around in the lake. Amanda looked just as confused as Rodney and I. Then Alicia went underwater for a few seconds, and Amanda started to scream she's drowning. I took off my shirt and ran as fast as I could into the water. But when I got to where she was, the water was only up to maybe my waist. I saw her arms still flailing out above the water and splashing about, and I pulled her up above the water. I yelled, "What the hell happened?" She didn't answer right away and ran straight for the campsite, seemingly out of breath. Halfway there, she turned and yelled, "Get out of the water." Amanda and I looked at each other and listened. As I began moving out of the lake, I felt something strong grab around my ankle and try pulling me down. There was a sharp, piercing feeling cutting into my ankle as well. I yelled in a panic and kicked whatever it was with my free leg until I was able to break free. We made it back to the campsite, and Alicia was already sitting down on a cooler, putting pressure on an apparent wound on her ankle. I sat down on another cooler and checked my ankle, and there was a deep but small gash on the right side of my ankle which was pouring out blood. I told Rodney to get us both some band-aids from my first aid kit in the tent. After patching up the wounds, we felt more relaxed and at ease. We just wanted to figure out what the hell that was that grabbed us. I said it might have been an eel. Rodney questioned if eels even live in lakes like this. Alicia said it didn't feel like an eel or a fish. It felt more like a claw. I got chills as she said it, because I got what she was saying, but how would that make any sense? Regardless, we stuck around because whatever got us was in the water, and we were on land. Nothing could happen now. By this point, it was dark out. The sun was completely gone, and the only light was from the fire. We were a couple beers deep, talking about life, about mutual friends, and occasionally bringing up that thing in the water again. All was well, until a splash came from out in the water. We all looked over our shoulders at the same time out to the pitch-black lake. Probably just a fish, we figured. We resumed conversation for a few seconds, but then there was another splash. It didn't sound like a little fish jumping out of the water. It sounded like the kind of splashes you'd hear when a person is walking through waist-deep water. The girls wanted us to go check the lake, so Rodney and I took a couple flashlights and went to the edge of the lake, where we were still hearing noises. With the two lights pointed at the water, we scanned the calm surface of the lake until Rodney stopped me and said, "What is that?" I looked at where his light was pointed. There was this object in the water. Well, at first I thought it was an object, but then I realized it resembled the head of some creature. Definitely not any kind of creature that would live in a lake. It seemed like it was just sticking its head out of the water, and we could see the reflection of its eyes. It was looking at us. Then it moved, as it rised up slightly out of the lake, making another splashing noise. That's when Rodney and I screamed "Go" to the girls. I remember Rodney saying take all your important stuff and go, which was a smart idea. I took all my valuables and left the tent and bigger things. We ran back down the trail to the parking lot, packed the car, and took off down the parkway. The next day, I returned with my dad to collect the tents, but everything that we left in the campsite was destroyed. The tents were shredded, the coolers were scratched and thrown across the site. I told my dad about the creature in the lake. I showed him the gash in my ankle and asked him what could have done this. He said he had no earthly idea, and we left in a hurry. None of us ever returned to that lake.
My house sits next to a nature preserve on Long Island, New York. I live alone most of the time, besides when my girlfriend who lives out of state comes to visit. Well, I can't say I live completely alone. I have 2 German shepherds, Tate and Moose. They sleep downstairs by the back door of the house. Last week, for 3 nights in a row, I would wake up to the 2 of them barking in the middle of the night at the back door. The first night, I just peeked from the door window into the yard, which was empty. The second night, I actually went outside to the patio to look around, but there wasn't anyone there. On the 3rd night in a row of waking up to barking, I told myself that was it. Someone was creeping around my property every night, causing my dogs to go crazy. I put Tate on his leash and took him out to the yard. Weirdly, he seemed more calm now that he was outside. He wasn't barking at anything. I walked him around the backyard and by the tree line to the woods for a little bit, trying to help him pick up on whatever the 2 had been barking at the past 3 nights. Then he started. By the tree line, he started tugging on his leash and barking at something in the woods. Obviously, I couldn't see too far into the woods as it was nighttime, so I let him lead the way into the woods. If someone were to be trespassing on my property every night, I figured the best way to scare them off would be having my dog chase after them. Tate kept pulling and barking as we got deeper into the woods. I was starting to lose my breath just trying to keep up with him. He seemed to be really locked into something specific in front of us. But eventually Tate stopped pulling and barking, and just stood there with his ears bent back, as if he were in a defensive position. He suddenly looked scared, as if he was looking straight ahead at something. I tried looking ahead into the dark woods, but I could only see so much. There was this cracking of a stick or small branch a little ahead that confirmed there was a presence with us in the woods. I took this as a time to call out, "Whoever's out there, you need to stop trespassing on my property. If you don't, I'll either unleash my dogs on you or call the police. Whichever I feel necessary to do." There was no kind of response or signs of acknowledgement, just another crunch of a twig or stick being pressed into the ground by something, once again confirming there was someone or something standing maybe 10 yards away. I whistled to Tate to follow as I turned us around and headed back to the house. Tate kept looking back every 3 seconds. I'd have to pull him forward just to keep us moving. But then I heard a footstep close behind us, and Tate started to growl and bark again. It was now that I truly started to feel threatened. I didn't have my phone on me, I didn't have my flashlight, my only sense of protection was Tate. Then there was this sound, this unexplainable sound. It was this clicking type noise mixed with this humming sound, almost like a giant bug. Tate started going crazy again. He was barking and pulling, but I held him back. I kept looking at what he was trying to lunge towards, and I finally saw something. There was a set of glowing eyes, only the eyes were set very high off the ground, not down low like from a cat or a raccoon. I started to run back towards my house now. I could see the light from my back patio shining through the trees now. I made it through the tree line back to my backyard. I ran Tate to the back door and let him inside. I turned back to the trees at the opposite end of my yard and I just stood there, listening and waiting for anything. A rustle in the bush made me turn my head about 20 degrees to the right. I saw a figure standing in the woods near the tree line. My patio light lit up the outline of the body somewhat. It looked like it had the shape of a humanoid-like figure, but it was crouched down, kind of hiding behind a little bush. It had extremely long-looking arms in comparison to the rest of its body, and on the lower half of its face, all I saw was black, almost resembling a big gaping mouth. I keep saying it because I knew what I was looking at couldn't be human. I went inside, shut all the blinds, and took my dogs upstairs to my room. I reported an unidentified creature in the preserve to the police. I gave my best description on the phone, and the woman on the other end asked me to call back if the person or creature were to actually enter my private property. Basically, calling the police was for my own peace of mind, but they didn't send anyone. I've been having my dog sleep in my room with me since last week, and there have been no further sightings since. I'll update everyone if anything changes.
My wife and I have lived in our Chapel Hill, Tennessee farmhouse for over 15 years, and for 14 straight years, nothing out of the ordinary ever happened. Our kids have all moved out. It's just me and the wife in the house now. February of 2019, bizarre things started happening. I woke up in the night to my wife shaking me. She said she heard a noise outside the window. She wanted me to go check. I simply walked over to the window, lifted it up, and had myself a look outside. It was chilly out there, so I didn't want to be looking outside for long, but the coast was clear. I shut the window and assured my wife it was okay, then crawled back into bed. Before we could even fall asleep again, there was a noise that made both of us sit up. A sharp but quick click at the window. My wife is no scaredy cat, but she grabbed my arm, clearly worried. She asked me to take the shotgun out there and see who it was. I told her to relax, and I checked the window one more time. I was shocked to find a small scratch in the glass from the other side. I said, "Honey, look at this," and she came over. She put her hands over her mouth and said, "Oh my." What did it? We didn't have a clue. Must have been some big animal, I figured. The next morning, I went outside to inspect the outside by the window. There were no footprints in the dirt by the side of the house. Nothing strange at all outside, actually. So we move on to the next night. It was a rainy, warmer night for February. My wife and I tucked in under the sheets again, and once again there was a sound that could be heard over the rain outside. It was this scraping type sound, muffled of course because it was coming from outside. The sound seemed to be moving closer to the window, then it stopped. My wife and I, sitting up again, looked at each other, and she didn't even have to tell me to go outside this time. I took the shotgun from under the bed again, put on my raincoat, and ran outside as fast as my old bones would allow. My wife turned on the light in the bedroom, which gave me enough light to see these huge scrapes in the vinyl siding. They looked exactly like claw marks. Then I looked down into the mud that I was standing in, and noticed these big feet marks that stopped right before the window, and then turned back in the direction of the woods. I analyzed the marks the best I could, even though they were quickly washing away from the rain. These didn't look like marks from boots, shoes, or any animal that I knew of. They looked like these huge footmarks with claws on the ends. We don't have black bears where we live. 15 years here and we've never seen one, so this just made no sense. I suddenly felt unsafe being out there, even with the shotgun, so I hurried back inside. I told my wife there's some big animal out there, and that as long as we stayed inside, we were safe. We don't have blinds on our bedroom windows, as we don't need privacy from anyone. No one comes out on the property anyway. All I could do was tell my wife to go to sleep. The next night was where things really took the turn for the worst. I woke up around 3 a.m. My wife was still asleep. I sat up, thinking I might have heard something. I realized it was chilly in the room. I looked at the window, and it was open, but that wasn't the first thing I noticed. The first thing I noticed was the head, leaning through the open window into our bedroom. My best description of the head? Inhuman. From the size and shape. It was bigger, and this had a more conish shape. As for facial features, it was just too dark to see any, and it all happened too quickly. I let out one big scream, the type of scream I hadn't heard leave my own body in decades. I went under the bed for the shotgun, but by then, the thing at the window was already gone. My wife was screaming in reaction to my scream. I ran to the window to slam it shut and twist the lock. I told my wife we're sleeping in our son's old room that night. Believe it or not, this was almost a year ago now, and that creature, whatever it was, has never returned. But for 3 straight days, that thing kept coming back to our window, and on the 3rd night, it was halfway into our bedroom.
I've been a trucker for close to 15 years now. This happened to me in 2017. I was driving an overnight haul through the Mojave Desert in California, headed for a destination in Arizona. I think I was delivering appliances, I don't really remember. It was pitch black darkness in every direction. The headlights on my semi were really dim at the time, and I had been putting off getting them fixed forever. Usually I couldn't tell the difference, but since there were basically no other cars on the road, it was much more obvious. I remember having to strain my eyes every few minutes to make out the road in the distance. That could have been a horror story in of itself. I was debating pulling over for a couple hours and waiting for sunrise, but I didn't want to waste my time. I desperately needed the money at the time, so I kept driving even though it wasn't fully safe. I figured since it was basically a straight line, it would be okay. I think it was about an hour before sunrise when I saw something approaching fast in the distance. Worried about hitting an animal, I slammed on the brakes. As my truck screeched to a stop, I realized what was in front of me. A car with its hazards on. The weird thing was that it was in the exact middle of the road, like literally on the double yellow. What was even weirder was that the passenger door was wide open. My truck stopped maybe a foot before hitting it. Not to toot my own horn, but I'm a pretty fearless guy, and I know my way around a bar fight. Because of this, I wasn't really scared when I saw the car. I was more curious than anything. I thought maybe someone needed a jump or something, so I reversed the semi and pulled over. I thought about throwing some flares down, but decided against it since I hadn't seen a single other car on the road besides this one. I got out of my truck and made my way over to the car. It was a warm, still night. I remember thinking how strange it was that there was almost no wind. It was also really quiet that night. The faint click of the hazards was the only sound in what felt like the entire desert. I got a little closer to the car. I vividly remember that it was a new-looking red Ford Fusion. I approached the car a little cautiously. Like I said, the passenger door was wide open. I walked around the car and stopped in my tracks. It was completely empty. I made sure of it too, checking the back seat and anywhere someone might be laying down. There was literally no one inside. All of a sudden, I was much less sure about the situation. I was expecting someone to need help of some sort, maybe even someone who took a nap in a really dumb spot. I certainly wasn't expecting this though. The car was literally empty. I cast a few glances over my shoulder, feeling a lot more uneasy now. I kept whipping my head around, looking in every direction. I felt like someone was going to charge me or something. The problem was, it was so dark that I couldn't see that far in front of me, except for what was lit up by my truck's headlights. It was eerie. I waited a while longer, thinking about getting back in my truck and forgetting about this whole thing. Someone was out there, somewhere. Against my better judgment, I decided to keep investigating. I looked inside the car, but everything seemed completely normal. The key was even in the ignition, although the engine was turned off. I got back out of the car and made my way over to the trunk. Might as well have a look, I figured. I went to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. I grabbed the key out of the ignition and unlocked the trunk. Still though, the thing wouldn't budge. It was jammed from the inside somehow. I opened the back door and tried getting at the trunk through the back seat. To my surprise, it actually opened. There were 3 squished garbage bags back there, along with a rope that was tying the trunk closed. I remember glancing one more time over my shoulder before reaching for them. The coast was clear. I must have been within 5 inches from one of the bags when the loudest gunshot I've ever heard rang out into the night. I slammed my head on the roof of the car in shock. I didn't even think. I threw the keys on the front seat and got out of the car as fast as I could. As I was climbing into my semi, I heard a grungy voice yelling in the distance. He yelled "hey" a bunch of times, and his voice seemed to be quickly approaching.
I scrambled into the semi and turned it on.
I threw it in gear as fast as I could. I remember cursing a bunch of times as the engine initially stalled, and that's when I saw it. As my truck began pulling out, I saw a person standing at the trunk of the car. He was a short, husky guy with red hair. He was wearing overalls and shin-high boots. In his left hand, he was holding a small shovel. In his right, though, was an old-looking hunting rifle. We locked eyes for a few seconds as my truck began to drive past him. He didn't move. I remember him not looking crazy or anything. He had this worried look on his face. As I passed him, he dropped his shovel and started waving his hands. He yelled "wait" a few times, but I wasn't staying there another second. As I drove away, I watched in the rearview mirror as he ran after my truck for a few seconds before sprinting back to his car. It was clear he wanted me to stop, but there was absolutely no way I was going to do that. I stepped on it, pushing the semi much faster than I should have. I drove for like 5 minutes and started to think I was in the clear, but then I saw headlights fast approaching behind me. I remember feeling more scared than I've ever felt in my entire life. I called the police and told them what happened to the best of my ability. That's when the car was basically right on my tail. It started honking like crazy at me. I honestly didn't know what to do, so I just kept driving, praying to God he wouldn't try and ram me. After like 15 minutes of this, he cut in front of me and hit his brakes, forcing me to slow down. I was just about to crash into him when finally some flashing police lights appeared ahead. The Ford veered off to the right and sped into the desert, disappearing from sight. I pulled over and waited for the officer to show up. I frantically told him what had happened, but the useless cop decided to get a report from me rather than chase the guy down. I was so pissed about that. I told the guy like twice that he could probably catch up to him if he left now. The cop told me not to worry and that they'd do a thorough search as soon as backup arrived. He sent me on my way and said they'd call me if they ever had an update for me. They never did. None of my buddies have a story this crazy, and I've told it more times than I can count. I know what you're probably thinking. That guy was definitely burying bodies. That doesn't really explain why he had such a small shovel, or why he tried to follow me. The bags in his trunk were also too small for that, although some of my buddies think he might have done some dismembering. For my own sanity, I like to think that he was burying some other kind of animal, maybe putting a diseased dog out of its misery, or some dangerous snakes. I really have no idea. Either way, I've never been totally comfortable driving through deserts late at night after this experience. I'm sure you've seen some of the more modern videos online where truckers will document their daily routines and provide tips for each other. Or maybe you haven't. But being as I'm on the younger side in this industry, every time I open TikTok or YouTube Shorts, that's all I see. I won't get into it, but I had to drop out of a pretty prestigious university for some personal reasons, and people always tell me I could have been more than a trucker. It's honestly not a bad gig, though. I've been making deliveries for north of 2 years. Obviously, the only strenuous part of the job is the long hours. You can never truly gauge how the isolation will affect you without experiencing it firsthand. My only advice would be to make peace with whatever demons might be lurking in your subconscious, because they'll definitely eat at your brain in the lonely hours. That's what happened to me, anyway. This happened to me 3 months after getting employed by my first company. I was basically as new in this trade as one could get. I was driving from southern New Jersey to Lafayette, Indiana, a 12-hour drive. 12 hours driving might not seem that crazy, but factor in the fact that I just completed an 8-hour trip, and that should put things into perspective. I wanted to get deliveries done as quickly as possible, so I opted to drive through the night. I'd get to Lafayette just before 3 a.m. Things were going smoothly. There were virtually no other cars on the road, so I was able to push the semi a little faster than normal. About halfway through the drive, I remember reaching down at the center console to chug a Red Bull, but there weren't any. Of course, I had forgotten to restock my truck after completing my previous delivery. After slapping my dashboard a few times, I groaned in frustration, knowing I'd have to stop somewhere. There was nothing I hated more than having to make stops during my drives. I might be unique in this, but I always get exponentially more tired when my vehicle is immobile, even if I'm only stopped for like 20 seconds. After glancing up at the navigation, I figured I had no choice. Either fall asleep on the road, or stop and get an energy drink. In my brain, those options were pretty much equivalent. Reluctantly, I pulled into the first service stop I saw. I had literally no clue where I was, probably somewhere in Ohio at this point. Too late, I realized this wasn't actually a service stop. It was what looked like an abandoned gas station and a repurposed convenience store. I'm not sure if there's any better way to describe it. Either way, it looked like there was another quick stop store not far up the road, so I figured I'd go there if anything.
I parked the semi and made my way over to the first convenience store.
To be completely honest, I was expecting one of two things to happen. Either the place would be open or the door would be locked. You can imagine my surprise then when the door swung open into a pitch black store. I looked around, hoping maybe I'd get lucky and there would be a drink or snack left behind. Just before I was about to turn around, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I picked up on a faint glow emanating from the corner of the room. I made my way over to it, and the glow turned out to be coming from a back room of some sort. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened the door slowly. To my pleasant surprise, there was a plugged-in refrigerator against the wall. Eagerly, I opened the door, but found nothing. Literally nothing. The shelves had literally been removed, like the whole appliance had been gutted. As I was shutting the door, I was 90% certain I heard a clatter from the main room, like something hitting the floor. I froze for a good 10 seconds. Had I imagined it? There was no way. Quietly, I walked back into the main room and looked around. Nothing. Part of me wanted to keep investigating. I didn't have time for this, though. I walked out the entrance door and basically jogged to the other shop. It was open, thank God. I paid for my drink and made it back to my truck. Something about this whole stop felt wrong. I needed to get back on the road as soon as possible. I took one last glance at the abandoned store and noticed the door was now open. I was 100% positive I had shut it behind me. It wasn't my job to figure out what was going on here, though.
So I started the engine and merged my semi back onto the highway.
The caffeine started kicking in and snapped me out of my tired haze pretty quickly. My mind began to wander, and I started thinking about how bizarre that whole thing had actually been. I guess a squad or an abandoned building wasn't the strangest thing in the world, but my brain couldn't explain that refrigerator no matter what theory I thought of. I tried to forget about it and kept driving. It was then that I started noticing weird movements in the curtain behind me. Sweat started dripping down my forehead. I watched in the rearview mirror as the curtain seemed to billow and move, even though I didn't have the air on. I thought the worst. There was someone in my truck. I didn't have any weapons on me or anything, so I discreetly punched in the nearest police station on my phone. The drive there was the most tense and horrifying 20 minutes of my life. I kept imagining that person reaching out to grab me or trying to crash my truck. Finally, I approached the police station. I stopped the semi as close as I possibly could get and basically ran over to the police station. In seconds, my truck was surrounded by police, and after I opened the back, what I saw will stay with me for life. The police pulled out 3 homeless-looking people, 2 men and 1 woman. They were wearing rags and were wrapped in nasty-looking blankets. One of the men was armed with 2 switchblades. All 3 of them refused to talk, but stared menacingly at me as they were getting cuffed. I have no idea what they wanted. I don't think I'll ever know.
My name is Kevin. I've been a trucker for varying companies for the better part of 15 years now. Things have become pretty routine at this point. Pick up the goods and materials, verify them for accuracy, and deliver them as instructed. We're not paid by the hour, so efficiency is the most important thing in this line of work. For someone like me who's been doing this forever, I like to think I can outwork all these young guns that are snapping these jobs up. This isn't always great, though. Usually I push myself to the absolute limit when it comes to functioning on barely any sleep. 4 years ago, I was working for a warehouse based in North Dakota. For anyone who doesn't know, North Dakota is one of the flattest states, which makes trucking a little easier. This also meant that skipping out on a few hours of sleep could mean the difference between employment and getting the sack. It was a chilly Tuesday morning in May. The beginning of the week meant that more loads needed to be shipped, which meant more work for me. I wanted to knock it all out in one shot, so I traced my route into Montana accordingly, planning on not stopping even once to sleep. I hit the road a few hours after lunch, expecting to reach my destination very early the next morning. I pushed the semi as much as possible, doing maybe a couple over the speed limit. It was getting late, and I remember rubbing the crust from my eyelids as the clock ticked past midnight. I was having trouble keeping my eyes open, but I only had about an hour left in this drive, so I gritted my teeth and kept going.
My buddy Tristan, who's also a trucker, introduced me to smelling salts when I first started out. If you don't know, smelling salts are basically some kind of crystals in a little bottle. One sniff and you're wide awake. You had to be careful though. Too many back-to-back uses could be dangerous, or at least that's what Tristan told me. They burn your nose a little bit, but whenever I needed a boost, I'd reach for the smelling salts first. This was one of those times. I took a big whiff and shot my head back, my reflexes taking over. I felt the adrenaline course through my body, and I hoped the feeling would last the rest of the drive. A half hour shot by, and I was really struggling. I felt myself start to doze off, and the blare of my truck drifting into the shoulder jolted me awake. This was getting dangerous, I thought. I had to pull off. I was all alone on the highway, but there was nowhere to pull off. There was just woods on either side of me. I slowed the truck down, searching desperately for somewhere to pull over. At this low speed, my headlights pierced through the darkness and I was able to see a lot more. As I looked around, I saw something that confused me. There was a purple dress lying in the middle of the road. What the hell? I thought, rubbing my eyes. Was I hallucinating? I blinked like 6 times just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. It was real. I approached the dress with my truck and stared at it as I rolled by. In hindsight, this should have been more of a red flag, but I think I was just too exhausted to process what was going on. About 200 or so yards away, I passed a pair of shoes. Now I was starting to freak out. What the hell was going on? I passed the shoes, praying to God there would be a place to pull off soon. My old man, David, was a super religious guy, so I clutched his old cross and hoped he would come through for me. A little further up the road, I saw a bunch more random clothing, some of which looked like little kids' clothing. This time I stopped the truck. The panic started to set in. Something was very, very wrong. I sat in the driver's seat with the truck at a standstill. I was expecting something to happen, but it never did. So I did what my instincts told me to do. I stepped out of the truck and went to inspect the clothing. I still remember the feeling of the chilly morning air piercing my skin, which definitely helped my exhaustion. I approached the pile as cautiously as I could. It was indeed kids' clothing. It looked like there were both boy and girl pieces of clothing in the pile. I looked around into the woods, but I couldn't see much of anything in the darkness. I had my head on a swivel, worried that this was some kind of trap. I decided it was not my business to figure out what was going on, so I made my way back to my truck. Just then, I heard a crunch from the left. I whipped around, trying to see what was there. I stood there, waiting to hear another sound. After about 30 seconds, there was another crunch, but this time from the opposite side of the road. My survival instincts kicked in, and I sprinted towards the truck. I jumped into the front seat, but just before I slammed the door, I heard a child's scream ring out. I froze, my heart bursting out of my chest. I was caught in a crossroads. I wasn't going to fight some random people in a pitch-black woods, but I couldn't just abandon some helpless kids either. Before I could make a decision, another almost identical child's scream rang out. Without thinking, I turned the truck on and pointed its nose toward the spot in the woods where I heard the noise. My headlights lit up about 30 yards into the woods. There were 3 or 4 people, one of whom was holding a massive speaker. They ducked behind a couple trees as my truck lit them up, but I had exposed them for just enough time to make out what they were doing. They hid from the light before I could really make out any distinctive features, but I swear on my old man David's grave, they were holding up a speaker, trying to lure me into the woods with a fake kid screaming. I was just in shock. I just sat there, staring at the trees those people had just hid behind. I reached for my phone to call the police, but before I finished dialing, I heard a thump from the body of the truck. Someone had thrown something from the other direction. I was done. I turned back to face the road and slammed on the gas. As I sped off, I could make out a person on the other side of the road. He shouted something I couldn't understand before launching something at the truck that cracked the glass of my passenger side window. I drove the final hour in silence. I was too scared to process what had just happened, but there was no way in hell I was stopping to sleep in those woods. I completed my delivery and then knocked out. I must have slept for 10 hours straight. When I woke up, the first thing I did was call the police, who told me they'd investigate those woods and give me any updates. I then thought about the whole thing and how stupid I was to get out of my truck. I should have just minded my own business. But the thought of some kids being kidnapped or worse was just too much for me to ignore. To this day, I still have no idea what those people were trying to do. I don't know why they didn't just rush me when they had the chance, or what they were planning to do to me if I ran out in the woods after the kids screaming. In all my years of being a trucker, nothing has ever come close to being as strange or downright terrifying as this experience. This story is from when I was a senior in high school. Back then, I was a rebellious teenager, but only when it came to my family. I was not a bad kid by any means, just a punk when it came to my family. I had a loving family, but I was that kid who was too cool to spend time with them. They always expected me to entertain my little brother Jake, who was only 10 years old at the time of this story. I was 8 years older than him. With that age difference, we may as well have been different species. Whenever we would take trips, my family would usually stay somewhere on or near the ocean. We only lived about 5 hours from the coast, so it was an easy trip. This specific year, they decided to take a trip to Maine. Don't get me wrong, it was beautiful, and as an adult, I would love to go back. But as an 18-year-old, I thought that this was the worst trip we could ever take. Before I continue the story, let me just acknowledge that I know how much of a piece of garbage I was back then. Even as I write this, I can't believe how much of a little punk I was. We got to the house, and it was incredible. It looked like something out of a Stephen King novel, which was fitting because we were in Maine. It was a massive white house with green shutters that was deep within the trees. My dad even made the joke, "This is how most horror movies start, isn't it?" Probably not the best thing to say in front of a 10-year-old, but my brother didn't care. He was just as mesmerized by the house as I was. Inside the house was almost like a maze. The back center of the house was a huge living room that had an awesome view of a forest behind the house. The rest of the house had all these hallways that intersected in places that strangely didn't make sense. It was like a house you would design in The Sims, and not something you'd see in real life. The weirdest part of this place was not the hallways. It was that the house connected to a small adjoining house. The house where the owner of the property we were staying at lived. His name was Hugh. He was, let's say, strange. He was tall and wore this very old, sweat-stained bucket hat. His teeth were very yellow, but it wasn't his physical characteristics that stood out. It was his personality. He was goofy and loud, a bit eccentric even. He welcomed my family and acted very friendly toward us. He kept referring to how kind folks from Maine were. My family's polite and nodded along with him while he was talking to them. He told us that he was right next door if we needed anything, and other than that, we wouldn't hear or see him for the entire week. We weren't thrilled about having this person basically in the same house as us, but there was nothing we could do now, and we just decided to make the best of it. Well, my family decided to make the best of it. I was being the worst and telling my family that I wanted to leave. I was looking for any excuse to leave and come home. The first morning there, while we were eating breakfast, my parents told us that we were going on this great hike. I told them that I didn't want to go. After a little back and forth, they decided to let me stay at the house, and the three of them were going to go on the hike. The main reason I didn't want to go was that right before vacation, I had just started dating this girl, Danny, and I wanted to talk to her. I knew if I went on the hike, I wouldn't get service, so I ditched my family to text my high school girlfriend. I was telling Danny about the house and sending her pictures of the weird layout. When I told her about the adjoining house, she didn't believe me. I told her I was going to send her a video to prove it. At the end of one of the hallways was a door. I sent her a video telling her that behind that door is Hugh's house. She still didn't believe me, so I sent her a video. I went to open the door, assuming it would be locked, and it wasn't. The worst part of this was that the door to Hugh's was right next to the door to my bedroom.
This guy's unlocked door that was right next to where I would be sleeping. I didn't love that. I ended up walking inside Hugh's house while on FaceTime with Danny. It was just a normal little house. The room I was in had a TV and a couch, nothing spectacular. I heard a door shut from somewhere in the house, and I panicked and ran back to our side of the house. A few minutes later, Hugh was knocking at the door. He was still cheerful and goofy and asked why I was recording videos of his house. I tried lying and telling him that I was just lost, but he didn't believe me. He also didn't seem that mad. He told me that he had cameras in his house and he got alerted to one of the doors opening. When he checked it, he had me on video flashing my phone all over the room. I just told him the truth after that, and he laughed. He made some weird comment about how nobody in Maine locks their doors. I laughed awkwardly and said I had to go. He left, and you better believe I locked the door. Maybe people in Maine don't lock their doors, but where I'm from, you lock the doors and check twice. Danny told me that she didn't trust this guy and that I needed to protect myself just in case. I carried a large wooden chair over to the door and basically propped it against the door as a makeshift lock. When my family came back, I told them about the weird interaction with Hugh, but they were more angry with me that I went into his house. They were right, but I still yelled at them anyway. My parents had only been back for maybe 30 or 40 minutes and told me to get ready because we were going out for dinner. Again, I protested and said I wasn't leaving. My parents were still a little upset about the Hugh thing, so they didn't bother fighting with me. They told me that they would bring food home for me. Not long after they were gone, the sun went down. I looked out the windows and it was pitch black, like no light at all. A couple of hours later, I was sitting on the couch texting Danny when I heard a loud crash. I sprang up right away. It sounded like it came from the end of the hall where Hugh's door was locked. I started putting pieces together in my head, and I concluded that the sound very well could have been the sound of the big wooden chair being knocked over. My first thought was that Hugh was trying to get in. I snuck over to the hallway, wanting to catch this creep in the act. It was too dark to see at the end of the hall. I flipped the light switch, and the chair was knocked over, and on the ground next to the chair was a backpack that wasn't mine. I ran to the screened-in front porch, locked the door that led to the inside of the house, and made sure the screen door to the outside was locked. I know it's not exactly a fortress, but it would at least give me time to make a move if I needed to. I sat in the fetal position on the ground under a patio table. I didn't know what to do, and of course, I left my phone in the living room where I was texting Danny. I heard footsteps coming from inside the house. Not erratic movements, just normal walking. I don't know exactly how long had passed, but it was at least several minutes when I saw the headlight of my dad's van pulling in. I got up, ran outside, and told them to stay in the car. My parents were confused because I was speaking incoherently about what happened. That's when Hugh came over, and I just about fell on the ground. He leaned over to my dad and said he needed to talk to him in private. I tried pulling my dad back, but he basically just dismissed me. I could tell by Hugh's body language that something was wrong. He wasn't being gleeful and silly anymore. He looked like he had seen a ghost. My dad shook Hugh's hand, turned to me, and told me to get into the van. He said that we needed to go somewhere quickly. My little brother was confused, and I could tell my dad was freaked out. My dad drove away from the house and to the grocery store parking lot about a mile down the road. Just minutes later, we saw several police cars drive by the parking lot. We all started yelling at my dad to tell us what was going on, and he was honest with us and told us everything. Hugh also heard the loud noise. He got an alert that his camera had been set off. The chair that I was using as a lock must have had enough of an impact on the door when it was knocked over that it registered movement on Hugh's camera. He assumed I was trying to get inside his house again. He thought that maybe I was trying to pull some kind of high school prank. He checked the cameras and didn't see anything. He said he had a gut feeling that something was wrong, so he decided to invade our privacy and check the camera that he had in the hallway of the house we were staying in. It was too dark to see anything until I turned the light on. He still only saw the knocked over chair and the backpack, which he thought could be mine. Just as he was about to turn the camera off, he saw a tall, bald man come out of the bedroom I was staying in. A man he knew wasn't my dad and wasn't me. The man grabbed the backpack and went back into the room. Hugh ran outside immediately to help me and noticed that's right when I had locked the screen door and ducked down. He was smart enough to assume that I probably wouldn't have believed him, and he was right. I wouldn't have. Instead, Hugh hid in the front yard with a clear vantage point of the house.
just in case this intruder tried anything. He didn't want to sneak in through the adjoining house and potentially alert the intruder because he thought that might put me in danger. As soon as my family returned, he told my dad everything, and that's why we ran off. We were only in the parking lot for a few minutes when Hugh called and said that the police chased the man into the woods and they hadn't caught him yet. He told us to remain there and that he would grab all our things and bring them to us. We stayed at a hotel that night and drove home the next morning. If I hadn't acted like a spoiled kid and stayed at the house, all this could have played out much differently. It could have been a lot worse. A few months later, my dad reached out to Hugh and asked him if they ever caught the guy. They never did. Even with all Hugh's cameras around the property, they still didn't know how he got in or even what his intentions were. He could have just been a homeless man looking for shelter. At least that's what I told myself back then so I could sleep at night. Sometimes the scariest things that happen to us aren't always face-to-face interactions. Sometimes it's just people hiding in plain sight. Every year, my family goes on this epic vacation together. We stay at my aunt and uncle's house that's right on the ocean in West Palm Beach. Their son Will is the same age as me, and we've always been good friends. It's also not just my immediate family. My other aunt and uncle join us and bring their kids as well. Their daughter Teresa is my best friend. We went all through high school together, and because we're the same age, have the same last name, and kind of resemble each other, everybody thought we were twins. We would love these family vacations because we would tell strangers that we were twins. As we got older, Teresa, Will, and I would party like rock stars on these family vacations. We would spend the day on the beach with the family, but at night, Will would take us to bars and clubs. Because he was the local boy, he knew all the hot spots. On one specific family vacation from a few years ago, the three of us witnessed something weird, something that still bothers me and freaks me out to this day. Teresa and Will aren't so freaked out. They think what we witnessed was some kind of prank or just a weird occurrence. I'm just not so sure. The trip was like any other West Palm family vacation. We were living it up. Once in a while on these trips, Will would accidentally have a little too much to drink. Maybe it wasn't accidental. The boy liked his drinks. But because of this, Teresa and I would know exactly when he hit his limits. That's usually when we would call it a night and find a ride home. I was always responsible for us getting home. I would only drink to a certain point, and then spend the rest of the time making sure that Teresa and especially Will didn't end up in a ditch somewhere. On this specific night, Will started getting a little rowdy in one of the bars. He kept saying that because he was a local, he could run his mouth, but that's not a thing. He was making a lot of people inside the bar mad, and he ended up getting thrown out of the bar we were at. And I mean, he physically got thrown out of the bar by the bouncer. He was mumbling a little bit, but he was fine. He didn't hit his head or anything. I think his self-esteem was hurt more than anything. I told Teresa to watch him while I tried to find us an Uber or another way home. He kept calling me a buzzkill, and that's kind of how I knew it was time to go. I secured us a ride that would be there shortly. While we were waiting, I called my boyfriend and just told him about the night we were having. He laughed and told me to call him when I got back to the house. Just as I hung up the phone, Teresa ran over to me freaking out. She said she wasn't paying attention to Will while she was on her phone, and he got up and wandered off. The boy was in no condition to wander anywhere. I tried calling him, but his phone kept going right to voicemail, which is right on brand for Will. After a few minutes of running around the streets yelling his name, I heard Teresa shout at me that she could see him. Thankfully, it was Will. He was walking in a very crooked line and heading towards the swamp or forest or something. I don't know what you would call it in Florida. I don't know the difference between what qualifies as a forest or a swamp. It was a heavily wooded area with a lot of mud and dirt. I'm going to refer to it in this story as a swamp because I feel like that's more on brand for Florida. Anyway, Teresa grabbed him before we entered the swamp and started giving him a verbal beatdown. Will was laughing and acting like a toddler. As soon as Teresa let go of Will, he sprinted into the swamp. I don't know if it was adrenaline or rage, but without thinking, we sprinted into the woods after him. It only took us a little while to catch up. He was so messed up that he wasn't moving very fast. Using the flashlight from the cell phone, we were able to see just how dirty and gross this area was. Our feet were completely covered in mud. As we started heading out of the thick brush, Will, of all people, told us to shush. We both looked at him like we were going to smash him in the face, and before we could speak, He told us to be quiet again. He ducked down and looked scared. This was a completely different Will than 10 seconds ago. It didn't take us long to realize why Will got down. We heard shouting and screaming coming from somewhere in the swamp. It wasn't just normal screaming, at least to me. It didn't sound that way. It was like screams I've never heard before, and I haven't heard them since. The three of us just stayed quiet and stayed put while the sounds of these screams echoed all around us. We couldn't tell exactly where the screams were coming from, but whoever was screaming sounded like they were in trouble. Then, almost as abruptly as they started, the screams stopped. We didn't move. We stayed put in that muddy swamp for at least another 15 minutes. Then we sprinted out of the swamp as fast as we could and made our way back to one of the streets with the bars. We got a ride home and sobered up real quick. We tried figuring out what we heard so we could make a rational explanation. Anything we came up with wasn't good. Teresa came up with the idea to check out the swamp in the morning. During the day, she said we could safely navigate the area and see if there was anything to be worried about. I know I would never be able to navigate my way back to exactly where we were that night before, but Teresa's good like that. She's like a professional hiker, and she proved that by getting us to the exact spot we were hiding in the night before. All three of our indents were still in the dirt from where we were hiding. We all talked for a little bit about what direction we thought the screams came from, even though it was hard to pinpoint because of the way the scream echoed. We all surprisingly agreed on the same general direction. Teresa led the way through the thick brush. This wasn't like a normal path. We were basically walking through bushes and mud puddles. A few minutes later, Teresa gasped. On one of the tree branches was the sleeve of a denim jacket. Just the sleeve. On the ground below the torn sleeve was a bunch of different footprints in the mud, almost like it was a struggle of some kind. I was ready to go back, but Teresa pushed forward a little bit. Not far from the sleeve was a small opening surrounded by trees. On the ground was the rest of the denim jacket. Surrounding the jacket were more of the footprints in the mud that looked like they were all bunched up in one spot, again making me feel like a struggle took place here. Leading away from the jacket was one set of footprints, and they led straight into more thick brush where it was impossible to track the footsteps anymore. I was done with all of this. I told Teresa and Will that I didn't feel safe anymore and that I wanted to go back to the house. They weren't as freaked out as me, but they were uneasy about all of this. We went back to the house, and I don't know why I let them talk me into this, but we agreed to just let it go. I was sure at that moment that we had witnessed some form of potential crime, but Will and Teresa didn't fully agree. They said it was possible, but most likely it was just a joke, or even more likely a coincidence that we found the code and just happened to hear screaming the night before. Will also convinced us that if we got law enforcement involved, we would be the only ones linked to the crime, if there was one, and that scared us, even though we clearly had nothing to hide. He made the point that it's possible the cops wouldn't believe three young adults were just in the middle of this random swampy area and witnessed a potential crime. Would they really believe that our drunk cousin just wandered into the swamp? If I could do it over, I would have called the police right after I heard the screams. At the time, I just thought Will made good points, and I thought it was best to just move on and forget about it. It's been several years now, and I still think about that scream. I've always wondered if I truly witnessed a crime, or if I just witnessed some intense domestic issue. I'm happy to get this story off my chest. It's been therapeutic in a way to share this. I hope nobody has to ever hear those kinds of screams in your lifetime, because you'll never forget them. This story I'm about to tell you happened to my girlfriend and I last summer. It was the first time we were able to travel together as a couple, and we were excited about it. She came with me one time on a family vacation, but that's not the same as being alone together, so this felt like a memorable and important next step. The trip ended up being memorable, but not for the right reasons. Not that anyone will ever find out who we are, but just in case, for privacy's sake, I'm gonna refer to my girlfriend as Vanessa in this story. One important detail I need to point out in the very beginning is that Vanessa loves to remind me that I'm way too nice and generous when it comes to meeting people. She claims there's a difference between just being nice like a normal person and being like my version of nice, which is apparently treating every new person I meet like they're my best friend. Those are her words, not mine. I'm an overly friendly guy, and that's gotten me into trouble many times in my life, but only once did it almost cost me dearly. This story starts on the way down to Ocean City, Maryland. It's a fun little tourist town. It's basically just a large coastal town with a ton of condos, hotels, and restaurants, and it's all right on the ocean for the most part. I used to travel there with my family when I was a kid, and this was the first time I visited as an adult. When we were about 20 minutes away from the condo we would be staying at, I decided to pull over at a gas station and fill up the tank, as well as grab a few drinks. While I was inside, a guy who later introduced himself to me as Henry bumped into me. He turned around and started apologizing like crazy. I put my hands up and assured him that it was completely fine and probably my fault anyway. Henry was a good-looking guy. He was wearing a pink and black button-up shirt, and it was mostly unbuttoned. He had kind eyes, and he made direct eye contact while we were talking. He was probably in his late 20s if I had to guess, but I don't know for sure. We talked for a minute or two while we were in line, and I told him that we were headed to Ocean City. He lit up and told me that he and his girl were also heading to Ocean City. I got excited and told him the name of the condo that we were staying at, and he smiled and said he thinks he knows where that condo is, and he's pretty sure that they're located right near us. I was excited for this genuine interaction. I get excited meeting people and making friends. One of my weaknesses is not being able to see the flaws in people. I think it's a strength, but Vanessa thinks it's a weakness, even though she loves that about me. Henry asked me to exchange numbers, and I did without hesitation. I told him that I'd give him a call sometime during the week, and we could link up at the beach or maybe grab dinner one night. We gave each other a bro hug and went our separate ways. When I got back in the car, Vanessa knew right away that I must have made a new friend because of the way I was acting. I told her the story, and she just rolled her eyes. We got to the condo that afternoon and just had a relaxing evening in the room that night. Our room was on the 5th floor, and it overlooked the ocean. We sat on the balcony and admired the view until we went to bed. The next day, we went down to the beach early. We're both early risers, so getting up early is no issue. We set up our chairs a little after 7 in the morning and drank our coffee on the beach. A few hours later, I heard someone shout my name from behind me. I turned around, and Henry was waving at me with a woman following him. She was not like Henry. He was mirroring a lot of my mannerisms and energy, and she looked miserable. She was pale, most of her face was covered by these huge sunglasses, and the rest was shaded by a huge sun hat. She was also wearing leggings and a button-up long-sleeve shirt. She was also carrying this large tote bag that looked empty. This was a woman who did not like the sun. She didn't say much. Henry introduced her as his woman friend, Sarah, and she just waved and gave an unenthusiastic smile. She was the opposite of the Henry I met the day before. After an awkward introduction, Henry asked if they could join us, and of course, we agreed. The more the merrier was always my motto. They didn't have chairs or beach gear. Henry just plopped himself in the sand while his woman friend stood there. I got up and offered her my chair, and she was hesitant for a second, but then took the seat. While we were sitting there, Henry told us they were staying in the building that was directly next to ours. My mind was blown. I couldn't even believe the odds of that happening. That was a major red flag for Vanessa, but not for me. We hung out for another hour or so, and then went back to the room. Before we left, Henry kept asking if we could all go out tonight for a drink, but I could tell Vanessa didn't want to, so I just told him I'd call him if we decided to go out. When we got back to the room, Vanessa started to tell me about all her concerns. She said that Henry seemed fake and that he was giving her major creep vibes. She also said that Sarah was one of the rudest humans she'd ever met. She complained about the sun the entire time. She also made a great point and said that she doesn't know anyone who comes to a beach town and hates the beach, and then yet goes down to the beach without bringing a chair, a towel, an umbrella, or anything. I told her she made great points and that I wouldn't call Henry the rest of the trip. The last thing I wanted was to ruin Vanessa's vacation. That night, I was sitting on the balcony smoking a cigar, even though that wasn't allowed. It was late, but I'm not sure of the time. I was looking down on the beach, and I swore I could see Sarah down there walking alone. I mean, she had the big tote bag, the big hat, and the same outfit from earlier. I was just too far away to be sure. I went back inside and got ready to call it a night. Vanessa was already in bed. I went to make sure the door was locked, and I thought I could hear someone talking coming from outside the door. This alone wouldn't be concerning, as there are several condos on the floor, but the talking sounded like it was coming from right outside my condo. I tried to listen, but it just sounded like incoherent mumbling. I got close to the door to check it was locked, and before I could grab the doorknob, I noticed it shook
as if someone was trying to open it from the other side. Instead of running or freaking out, I just politely shouted that they had the wrong room. I heard the sound of footsteps running away after I said that. I had just assumed that maybe somebody had mistakenly tried to get into the wrong room. After all, accidents happen. I stayed awake a little longer just to make sure I didn't have another surprise guest. Nobody else came to the door, and I went to sleep. The next day, the same thing happened. Henry and Sarah seemingly came out of nowhere and joined us on the beach. They were wearing the same clothes again. Normally, that wouldn't be weird on the beach if you were wearing a bathing suit or something, but Henry and Sarah were not wearing bathing suits. He was still wearing the same outfit I saw him wearing at the gas station, and she was wearing the same outfit as the day before. We didn't spend a lot of time at the beach on this day. I could tell Vanessa was all done with these two. I politely told Henry that her and I were going to go back to the room for a while and then have a romantic dinner out. I told him that I'd text him if we were down to grab a drink later. He seemed overly excited for some reason and let us go. While we were getting ready to go out, I looked out the balcony and I saw Sarah standing on the ground where the beach meets the patio of the condo building. She wasn't facing the building, she was facing the ocean. It was weird that she was in front of our building and not where they were supposedly staying. But the weirdest thing was that Henry was nowhere to be found. She was by herself. I watched her for a little while, which made me feel like a creep. A few minutes went by, and Henry emerged from what looked like the bottom of our building. I watched him go over to Sarah. He started waving his hands around and then stormed off in the opposite direction from where they were staying. Sarah waited a few seconds and then followed him. That whole interaction felt weird, but who am I to judge? Once Vanessa was ready, we left the condo and went out to eat. While we were out, my phone kept ringing. It was Henry. I didn't answer it. After dinner, we started walking back to the condo since we were only a few blocks away. Henry called again. Vanessa told me to just text him back and tell him we're going to bed so he stops calling. So I texted him and said that we were walking back from dinner and that we were going to bed early. Immediately, my phone started ringing. It was Henry. I didn't answer. He finally sent a message that said, "Hey buddy, let's meet for a drink before you get back. It's too early to go to bed." Vanessa rolled her eyes, and even I was getting annoyed now. I responded with another text that said, "Thanks for the offer, but we're going to bed. We're already about to be at the condo." Then I got the weirdest text of all, a text that may have had some other implications. All it said was, "Don't go to your room yet." We both stopped and contemplated the text while standing in the parking lot of the condo. Henry was strange, but was he capable of something malicious? Vanessa thought so. We got to the room a few minutes later and noticed that the door was slightly open. I know for a fact that I did not leave the door open. Vanessa started to panic and she waited in the hall. I slowly entered the room and was relieved everything looked how we left it, at least at first. Then I started noticing things that weren't how we left them. The balcony door was open, but nobody was out there. In the bedroom, both of our suitcases were completely ransacked, and the only thing missing was a pair of Jordans I brought, Vanessa's bathing suit, and a picture of us that we had printed out and left on the dresser in the bedroom. We called the police and told them that we thought it might be Henry and Sarah who broke into our room, but those were almost for sure fake names. The condo next door had no record of a Henry staying there, and the only Sarah in the building was not that Sarah. When they tried to track the phone, it was no longer in service. The local police told us that it's not something that happens a lot in that town, but occasionally, some people will try to rob tourists. We were just some of the unlucky people who were chosen, I guess. The only thing I took from this experience is that I really need to be more careful about who I trust. And if anyone out there visits Ocean City, Maryland, just be careful because somewhere out there, Henry and Sarah are still lurking.
The month of August is full of thunderstorms where I live, which inspired this video topic. Thunderstorms evoke a certain emotion for me, as I used to love watching thunderstorms with my grandfather. Fragrance is something else that's very powerful in evoking emotions and memories. My grandfather had a very distinguishable scent that I still remember to this day. Through Scentbird, I found many fragrances which I use daily, one of which being Kinetic by Toomey, a fragrance that reminds me of my grandfather and evokes positive memories for me, with the scent mixing the aromas of Italian mandarin, sandalwood, and vanilla. Scentbird is a monthly cologne and perfume subscription service that lets you discover over 700 designer fragrances without committing to a giant expensive bottle, which also lets you try a new fragrance every month to switch things up. Another one of my favorites is Cross River Gorilla, which has a scent that mixes the aromas of cardamom, green apple, violet leaf, and smoked leather, rated as a casual scent perfect for the fall season. What I love about Scentbird is the affordability. The vials are cheaper than a lot of the rollerballs or travel sizes at the store. Scentbird carries some of the finest fragrances like Gucci, Prada, and Versace and delivers them right to your door. You get to try the first fragrance from Scentbird for only $8, and your next month will be only $16.95. If you're interested in trying Scentbird, use my code MrNightmare55 or the link below to get 55% off at Scentbird. You'll get the product for half the price at just $8. I was at a ripe young age where being left home alone was exciting. I was like 13 and my parents had just recently started entrusting me to be home alone overnight. The only condition was I couldn't leave the house or have anyone over, but I was fine with that. Something about being able to blast my music or video games without my dad yelling at me was just exhilarating. To make things even better, it was a rainy night which turned into a thunderstorm. I sat outside under the awning for a while watching the thunderstorm as I like to do. I've always loved thunderstorms, as they just make staying in so much more cozy. After a while of watching the storm, I moved my Xbox from my room to the downstairs den TV, my dad's huge flat-screen TV with the Bose sound system. The only time I'd get to game on there was when I was home alone, and I loved it. The den was a half flight of stairs down from the living room level, and it was level with the backyard, so the backyard door was in the den. I'm describing the house in past tense because I moved out, but my parents do still live there. So I was playing Black Ops down in the den with the volume blasting. I was playing online multiplayer in a party with my friend Cody. I had some crappy old headset, which the only audio you could hear was other people in the lobby and game talking. For a 13-year-old standards, it was the perfect night, until something interrupted my peace. The sound of the doorbell. It was past 9 o'clock by then. I told Cody the doorbell rang, and he said I should go check and see who it was. I wondered if maybe it was my parents back home early, but they had the keys, so they wouldn't ring the doorbell. I hid in a spot in the game where I wouldn't get killed. Then I went upstairs to the front door, asking who's there. I didn't realize how much of a mistake that would be. A male's voice on the other side said, "I need to use a phone." I didn't know what to do, so I didn't answer and went back downstairs. But it was too late. The damage was done, and I let whoever was out there know I was home. I told Cody about it, and his reaction was simply, "Yo, what the fuck?" He agreed with me that I shouldn't open the door, but the doorbell rang again. Cody said to ignore it. That was the last time I heard the doorbell, and after a while, I relaxed again, as it seemed whoever was out there had left. I can't explain the roller coaster of emotions I felt that night. One moment I'm on edge, the next I'm relaxed and back into the fantasy world of my game. And then, as I was most at ease, I heard something to my right, and when I looked, I saw the back door closing and some tall man stepping inside. It was not my dad. It was a stranger. I dropped the controller and ran for the office door, and the cord to the headset quickly ripped out of the controller. I made it to the office and slammed the door shut, and I'm by no means exaggerating when I say the second after I locked the door handle aggressively shook as the man on the other side tried opening the door. The office had two doors in it, one that led to the den and one that led to the garage. My only chance to escape the house was to go through the garage. But before even moving, I just stood still, waiting for something to happen on the other side of the door. Seconds felt like minutes. The man knocked on the door and said, "Little boy, I just need to use your phone. I was stranded out in the rain." His knocks turned to pounds as his voice got louder and angrier sounding. It gradually turned to yelling and pounding. He yelled, "Open the fucking door, you little shit," as it sounded like he was literally trying to break down the door. I had no choice but to go through the garage. I pressed the button to open the garage door, and it was so loud and slow to open that I prayed the man couldn't hear it.
As soon as it was up about halfway, I crawled under and ran through the storm a few doors down to our neighbor Julian's house, who I knew well because I used to play with his dog Copper when I was little. I heard Copper barking as I rang the bell, looking back in my house, hoping not to see someone coming down the block. Julian opened the door, and I ran into his arms, begging him for help, as his wife came out of the kitchen in confusion. When I told them of the break-in, their demeanors instantly changed. Julian got the police on the phone and handled getting them to my parents' house. It was a long, long wait before the police were outside, and Steve and I went out to them. I told them the same thing I told Steve, and after they asked which door was unlocked, I said the garage. A couple of them went through the garage into the house, and after maybe 5 minutes, they came outside with a man in handcuffs. They made sure he didn't see my face. After he was in a police car, they asked me if I knew that man, and I said no, of course I don't know that man. He had been telling the officers that this was his house and that I was his son. I could tell he was drunk or high or just generally crazy based on the things he was yelling and the way he was acting. He was brought to jail, and my parents had to be contacted regarding how they wished to proceed, and they pressed charges. His name was John McCarty. He got charged for, I believe, criminal trespass. It didn't make me feel any safer that that man would one day be out and know where I lived. Thankfully, it was just a random chance encounter. I don't believe he specifically targeted me or our house. So whenever he was released, he didn't come back. I never thought in a million years that anything truly horrific would ever happen to me. I'm an average person with a boring enough life that anything out of the ordinary was really out of the ordinary. This is why I was always okay with watching or listening to those creepypasta and true horror stories on YouTube. I still do watch them often, but after my own experience, these stories scared me in a whole new way. It was late at night, I'd say around 4 a.m., but I don't really know for sure, and everyone else in my house was asleep. My mother and both of my grandparents. For the past 2 months or so, we get at least one major thunderstorm per week, and it just so happened that this one decided to start earlier that night. Now, I always enjoy a good thunderstorm, especially at night when you can go sit by a window and just watch the lightning, but something about the wind of them always creeped me out. Maybe the fact that it could be soft or deafening and switch between the two almost instantly, but for some reason, wind has always given me huge creeps. Now, this night's thunderstorm was one of the worst we'd had in a long time. It sounded like rocks were hitting my window all night, but I was enjoying listening to it while I browsed Reddit, as I do, when all of a sudden, the power went out in the blink of an eye. This was kind of creepy, but I didn't really mind, because I had my data and a decent charge on my phone, so I continued browsing. After a little while, I started to get tired, so I figured it was time to shut my phone off and get some sleep. I placed it on the side table next to me and rolled over to go to sleep. I guess I passed out shortly after because I don't remember anything in between the rain hammering at my window and the eerie silence of a soft wind outside. I assume the rain stopped while I was asleep. I rolled over to get more comfortable because my side was hurting, and then I realized just how parched for water I was. I took a few minutes to try and fall back asleep again, but it didn't happen. My mouth was just too dry. I sat up, grabbed my phone, and turned on the flashlight so I could have a source of light to the kitchen to grab a glass of water and go back to bed. As I opened my bedroom door, I was smacked in the face with a blast of cold air. It was freezing in the living room. I quickly threw on a sweater and continued to the kitchen. As I was nearing it, I could hear the wind becoming louder and the temperature become colder. I reached the kitchen and walked in, grabbed a glass from the cupboard, and started to fill it with water from the tap. I took a quick glance around the kitchen and noticed something weird. The door to the patio was left open. Naturally, I was weirded out by this and a little scared, thinking of how that could happen. I ended up rationalizing to myself that my grandfather must have left it open earlier that night and just forgot about it. I walked over to the sliding door, glanced over my shoulder out of paranoia, and slid it shut and locked it. I fast walked back to my room just in case. I opened my door and closed it behind me, and then laid back down in bed, my glass of water on my side table and flashlight still in hand. I was able to calm myself down slightly, enough to turn off the flashlight and try to get some shut-eye. Something inside of me wasn't letting me forget the possibility that there might be someone in my house. I got back out of bed again and slid my chair from my desk to my door in an attempt to keep someone out. I then checked the closet again, just in case.
I laid back down again and kept my flashlight on as a sort of nightlight this time. Then, the most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me occurred. I felt a slight bump come from under my bed, accompanied by a creak of the bed springs. I then realized I hadn't checked under my bed like an idiot. It felt like I was gonna vomit, and I leaned off the side of my bed and peered underneath. I saw the disturbing sight of an extremely unhealthily skinny woman with bloodshot eyes and yellow teeth staring back at me. She was smiling an ungodly grin that I still can't get out of my head. She stared at me for at least 3 seconds while I was still trying to process what I was seeing, before she, I swear to God, cackled like a fucking witch. At this point, my whole brain was screaming nope, and I leapt out of my bed towards my door, moved the chair as fast as possible, and sprinted down the hall to my grandparents' room. I banged on the door as loud as I could while calling for my grandfather. He was out within seconds and he had a gun in his hand, something he had never even mentioned having in the house. We ran to my room, him in front of my grandmother and we just barely caught a glimpse of a white figure running away from the bedroom window. My grandfather took a shot, presuming as a warning to tell them to never come back. We didn't end up calling the police because we figured they wouldn't be able to do anything since we don't have security cameras or have any idea who she even was. All I can guess was that this woman was dangerously ill and saw my bedroom light on before the power went out. I have no idea what her intentions were or if she even knew what she was doing. We're getting the windows and doors in the house installed with locks sometime the next week just for safety. And all I can say is, even if you live in a safe area or a trusted community, bad things still can and do happen, and you always have to take precautions against such things. It was August. My girl Cass and I went upstate for a little weekend getaway at my family's rustic mobile home. It has running water, electricity, and a toilet, so we call it luxury camping. The home is very small, about 600 square feet. 1 bedroom, 1 pull-out couch in the living room, 1 bathroom, and a very small kitchen. Despite its remote location, there's lots to do, including archery, shooting, dirt biking, and off-roading. We had a whole little itinerary planned for the weekend. Friday, we mostly just unpacked and went out to eat, went grocery shopping, then relaxed. Saturday, we did most of the stuff I just mentioned before, until it started getting really cloudy out, like storm clouds. We also could feel it in the air that a big storm was brewing, so we put all the stuff we took out back into the outbuilding. We put a movie into the DVD player as we cooked dinner. At some point while we were eating, we heard the sudden torrential downpour of rain on the roof of the home. Pretty soon, there were loud, thunderous crashes of lightning almost directly overhead. We both wanted to go sit outside and enjoy it as we ate. We relaxed on the deck outside under the canopy, with an amazing view of the sky. Long bolts of lightning constantly lit up the dark night sky, the thunder booming almost instantly after the lightning strikes. We were right in the heart of the storm. And then, we heard something out in the woods. It was a voice, a loud voice seemingly calling out something, but it was nowhere near discernible. So the place is really remote, like I said. Hearing any other voices nearby would already set off alarms in normal conditions, but during a storm like this, it was extremely concerning. We had to assume that it was a lost hiker or something. I stepped over to the edge of the deck, getting a little wet as the rain blew in under the edge of the canopy. With the constant crashing of thunder and lightning, there were moments of light in the vicinity that allowed me to see just far enough away to the tree line where the woods began. There was a person out there, clear as day. I told Cass, and she instantly freaked out, thinking I was joking and telling me to stop. I considered calling out, asking if they needed help, but decided against it on the grounds that I was kind of scared. This weekend was my idea though, and I did kind of drag Cass up here. I didn't want to ruin the experience freaking her out. I went back to her and said I think it's a hiker. She asked if we should offer some help, and I said not unless they come knocking on the door. I told her we should go inside, and I nudged her in. I went back over to the edge of the deck just out of curiosity. I got even wetter as I looked around, until I spotted something. It looked like a person again, much closer to the deck, like a lot closer, only about 20 feet away now. I continued to look, until a quick flash of lightning briefly exposed a man standing there, confirming my suspicion.
He was wearing bright colors. It almost looked white. He was just standing still. That was the scariest part. He wasn't even approaching the deck or anything. I went inside and quickly locked the door. Cassidy saw the worry in my face. I felt my heart racing, and I almost felt nauseous. I'm sure I almost stuttered as I said, "I don't know who that is." And then I saw the worry in Cass's eyes worsen. I did my best to keep her calm, telling her to expect someone knocking on the door asking for help. I said they probably just need shelter from the storm. I tell you, it was the longest 5 minutes ever, just sitting and listening to the pouring rain and lightning outside, before we felt and heard the footsteps outside on the deck, even over the sound of the storm. The home doesn't have a doorbell, so we expected a knock on the door, but instead, there was this weird shuffling sound on the other side of the lone wooden door. It sounded like attempts at opening it. It was at this point that the worry I had been feeling had peaked. I think I felt an adrenaline rush at this point. Cass was already in the bedroom, hiding at this point, and she was quietly calling for me to come. The noises at the door stopped, but there was never a single knock. I went to the bedroom and told Cass to just remain quiet. I'll be back in the room in a second. I wanted to look out the window. I went back to the living room and turned off the lamp. I took a second to just breathe before yanking the curtain open. I looked out the window, and I saw the white figure of the man running away from the window and quickly disappearing. I didn't know what was going on. I hoped that they ran away for good. To be safe, I went to the kitchen window and looked out. This one didn't have a curtain or blinds. I realized about halfway to the window that there was a face on the other side. I could see it even through the blur created by the rain on the window. I yelled at the top of my lungs, "Yo, go away," trying to sound scary. They didn't move. Now when I say this, I know it sounds incredibly cliche, but we don't have Wi-Fi in the home and the cell reception is very on and off. During a storm like this, there was no reception at all for either of us. There was my dad's rifle under the bed in the bedroom though. I left the kitchen and hurried to the bedroom where Cass was sitting in the bed biting her nails on edge. I grabbed the rifle under the bed from its case since we hadn't yet taken it out. There was a magazine already loaded with rounds thankfully, so I popped the mag in the rifle. Doing this in front of Cass obviously meant I was no longer sugarcoating what was going on, but it didn't matter, because there was suddenly a bang at the bedroom window. Something was either thrown or someone straight up banged their hand on it. And then a second later, there was a bang from another window out in the living room or kitchen. It was more than one person. This had gone far enough at this point. I told Cassidy to wait in the bedroom. I went to the front door and positioned myself to be ready to potentially fire at anyone on the other side of the door should they rush me. I quietly unlocked the door, and when I was close enough to mentally ready, I yanked the door open and drew my rifle up, pointing at the door. No one was there, and so I hurried outside with adrenaline controlling my actions and spun around quickly to ensure no one was on the deck. Then I went to the stairway and looked down, and there was that guy in bright-colored clothes standing where he was before outside the window, apparently trying to look scary. He looked up at me. He already knew I was outside, but I doubt he knew I had a gun. I shot the rifle into the air, and I heard the guy yell in a deep voice, "Oh shit," as he ran away into the darkness. I heard at least two fading yelling voices likely communicating to each other, and then it was just the sound of the storm again. I don't know how many people were out there. At least 2, maybe even 3. It could have been teenagers playing some fucked up prank, or it could have been some really messed up people trying to scare us and break in. I don't play around like that though. If anyone came up that deck while I was outside, I would have shot them dead. They were not there seeking help, and that is a 100% certainty. The next day was Sunday, and so we packed up and left. There were no signs of anything having been done to my car or the home or anything from the night before. I made sure to lock everything up and take anything of particular value home this time. Out of all the years of my family owning the place, that was the only encounter like this any of us had ever had. It really put a bad taste in my mouth about the place and being in an isolated place. I've been up there a few times since with my family, but I would never ever go alone.
I'm a big solo traveler. My friends are usually too busy or can't afford to constantly fly to a million different places, so I do a lot of it myself. I flew to San Diego for my first time alone. I'd been to most of the major cities in California except for San Diego, so I wanted to check it off my bucket list. I stayed in a decent hotel very close to downtown. As I checked in, I met a guy a little older than me in the lobby. He struck up a conversation with me about where I was from, how long I'd be here for, and if I'd ever been here. It was apparently his second time here, and he was also alone. He offered to take my bags to my room for me, since he was going upstairs anyway. I accepted his offer, appreciating his kind gesture. He carried my bags to the elevator, and we went to the second floor to my room. He set my bags down outside my door and said it was great meeting me and to enjoy my stay here. I thanked him again, and he left down the hall. I let myself into the room, set my bags on the bed, and laid down for a bit just to get a quick nap in. When I felt refreshed, I went back down to the lobby and was about to head outside when the lady working the front desk called me over. She asked what that man did when we went upstairs, and I told her he just helped me with my bags to my room. She then warned me that that man had been standing outside the hotel for a while, and she noticed him come in moments after I came inside. She told me that she was fairly certain he wasn't staying in the hotel, and if I see him again, I should stay away from him. This was of course very unsettling. I hoped she was wrong and he was actually just a nice person, but to be safe, I would listen to her. I went out and explored and had myself a day. I came back a few hours later to change into different clothes for dinner. There was a different person working the front desk now. In the hotel room, I showered quickly, then changed into different clothes and laid down for another quick power nap. During this time, there was a knock at the door to my room, followed by a quiet male's voice saying housekeeping. I didn't order housekeeping, and it was my first day there. Maybe they had the wrong room. I went to check the peephole of the door, and I didn't see anyone in the hall. That was beyond strange. Then, immediately, that man from earlier came into my head. What if it was him? I ignored the knocks and went to my phone to call the front desk and ask them if they had sent housekeeping to my room. And of course, they said no. So I asked for someone to be sent to my room for my own safety, and 5 minutes later, a hotel maid knocked on the door. I opened it and explained politely the situation to her, and thanked her for coming. I then left the hotel to go to dinner. After dinner, I did a city lights night tour, and explored some of the happening areas of the city at night. I got back to the hotel room around 10. I went up to the front desk worker and then explained what happened earlier, with the man I met who I feared may have been pretending to be room service to get into my room. I then asked her if she had seen anyone of his description walking around the lobby, and she said no. And to make me feel better, she checked the live surveillance camera of my floor, and no one was in the halls. I thanked her and went upstairs to my floor and then to my room. I changed out of my clothes and laid in bed and put on the TV so I could fall asleep to something. Within the hour, I was drifting into a sleep. What I was hearing from the TV was kind of turning into a dream in my half-asleep state. So when I heard a door closing, it became part of my dream. I didn't actually wake up until I felt the mattress start shifting as something was putting weight on the other side. I looked over my shoulder to the other side of the bed, and I saw a man in a black COVID mask and baseball hat getting onto the bed, reaching for me. He grabbed me, trying to cover my mouth so I couldn't scream, but I managed to fight him off for long enough to scream bloody murder. He continued to try to cover my mouth, but I kept struggling and resisting just long enough for someone to start knocking on the door. I screamed help, and by this point, surely the man knew this wasn't going to go his way anymore. He let go of me and opened the door and shoved the woman who was knocking to the floor, and she saw him run down the hall to the stairs. The woman came in to make sure I was okay, as I was in complete shock, followed by tears. Others from neighboring rooms came to see what the commotion was about. Hotel staff came as well, and the police were called. Based on the hotel video footage, the man somehow acquired a master key which allowed him to access my room. The mask and hat hid his identity, but I strongly believe it to be the man who helped me with my bags the first day. I believe he wanted to find out what room I was in to later come back to. It's scary to think he may have done this successfully to somebody else. I tried my best to enjoy the rest of my trip, even though I went through something that will likely stay with me for the rest of my life. The hotel gave me a full reimbursement for the entire stay, and they gave me a different room to stay in. Honestly, looking back, I probably should have pressed charges on the hotel. The hotel, of course, also gave all the necessary footage to the police department. I haven't ever been contacted to identify anybody, which sadly more than likely means the man was never properly identified or caught. The events of this story take place a few years ago, maybe in 2013 or 2014. Honestly, I don't remember because the story is such a blur and I've eventually just blocked it out over the years. It was Christmas break and I was a freshman in college attending a university in New York City. With that being said, I was miles apart from my family who lived all the way in Bulgaria. For some of you who may not know where that is, Bulgaria is just a small country in Eastern Europe, right by Romania and Greece. Bulgaria's safety reputation and regulation isn't really that good, but this story actually contrasts that. I was at JFK Airport, maybe just a few days before Christmas Eve, because my initial plan was to surprise my family and friends in Bulgaria. The airport very obviously was packed and loaded with a lot of people, making my traveling experience way more complex and difficult. After hours of security, luggage weighing, and waiting for time to pass, I finally was at rest when the first plane to Istanbul from Manhattan was setting off. The first plane ride was around 8 hours, so I was prepared to be somewhat miserable and sore for the classic economic seating arrangement. I was sat next to two men, unfortunately. For the record, I'm a 5 feet, 110-something pound woman, which didn't make it any better either. These two men were probably well over a foot taller than me and could easily overpower me. The man on the right to me was relatively quiet, black hair, glasses, and low-key ripped. The guy on the left to me, however, freaked me out. He would occasionally mumble to himself quietly, and he would pick at his skin, sometimes even nudging his arm close to mine. I took note of the guy to the left of me and tried my best to have a decent 8-hour flight. The only thing keeping me productive was the fact that I'd be in my home country in less than 48 hours. But this productiveness got trimmed short when I'd be minding my business, maybe doing work or listening to music, and the guy left of me would be very bluntly staring at me. I tried shrugging it off. Maybe he has a disability that made him lack social cues. But as time went on, I started to doubt that. At some point during the flight, I was watching season 2 of American Horror Story, and the man began speaking to me, asking why I was watching a show that poorly represents the mentally ill, murderers, and whatnot. Very nervously and hastily, I asked him if he needed anything, since it's inappropriate to randomly disturb a stranger who's minding their own business. The season of American Horror Story I was watching was Asylum, which portrays cold-blooded murderers and insane people of a mental hospital. The guy looked me straight in the eye and said very candidly, "I just think it's fucked up how everyone thinks people who skin others alive are crazy. I mean, aren't we all like that?" I mentally began freaking out, asking myself who the hell was I sitting next to, and did anyone else hear that? I chuckled, brushing it off to seem unbothered. For the rest of the flight, I was scared shitless, and I contemplated asking for an open seat that may have been available by the back of the plane. But nonetheless, the flight came to an end and we arrived in Istanbul. I gathered my stuff as quickly as I could and escorted myself out of the plane as soon as possible. Now, I wish I could say the story ends there, but unfortunately it does not. The rest of my Christmas was fine, but what that man said still rung in my head like a bell. As January approached, I began packing up again to head back to New York. I was sorting out my tote bag and throwing out any old trash I may have stuffed in there from traveling, when I came across a disgusting note that must have been slipped in there when I was sleeping. It read the following: "I wish I could see what you look like under your skin. I really wish I took a picture of it as evidence, because only a month later into February, there was a news article that my younger sister sent to me that basically talked about the same exact man from my plane ride being sent to jail for multiple accounts of rape, attempted rape, kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, and first-degree murder in Istanbul." Reading that article made me sick to my stomach, and honestly, that whole experience drove me to just stay home for the holidays for a few years. In the winter of 2018, to escape the cold weather, my girlfriend Claire and I took a week off from our jobs to go away to a nice beach resort in Mexico, where the water was crystal blue and the weather was perfect. The resort was extremely affordable for a 7-day all-inclusive package. It had a buffet, 3 pools, was on the beach, had a million bars, an entertainment hall, and tons of group excursions. We were going to be there for a whole week, so we had a lot planned. The first couple days we relaxed around the resort, getting use out of the unlimited drinks package. The surrounding area of the resort was a lot of jungle and scenic looking roads, so we took a private shuttle on the third day to the nearest car rental place. The shuttle driver warned us not to stray too far from the coast, as there are a lot of unsafe areas. We rented a Ford Fiesta. There weren't exactly any Mustangs or Camaros at this rental place. The car rental place was in a small city about 5 miles up the road from the resort. There was basically this one long road that ran along a bunch of resorts, and next to this road was miles of jungle and occasional small towns. We drove south on the road until we ended up in Tulum. The actual city of Tulum was less appealing than I had imagined, considering a lot of my friends were always talking about wanting to go there. We drove through the Tulum area and then back up north. We found a dirt road into a jungle area, and decided to just drive through it and see where it goes. On either side of us was just jungle, probably for miles. We drove down this wide dirt road, enjoying the scenery and little off-roading experience, though Claire seemed to think we shouldn't be on a dirt road like this in a rental in fear of dirtying it up, and I agreed. So we did a 3-point turn and started heading back in the direction of the main road. Eventually, we were stopped by these 3 men walking out from the jungle onto the road. We both simultaneously said, "Oh no," knowing this could be trouble. I brought the car to a halt and lowered the window a little bit as one of the men came up to it and started speaking in Spanish. I said no hablo español, and things started to get a little heated. One of the other men came to Claire's window and knocked on it. I told her not to lower it. The guy at my window started saying money, money, and I saw the one man still in front of the car making his way to my window as well, and he pulled a knife out of his right pocket. I stepped on the gas and the car jumped forward. The 3 men were yelling and running after us, but obviously they couldn't run faster than a car. Our hearts were in our throats from that encounter. I didn't let up on the gas until we made it off the dirt road. After that, we didn't really want to drive around anymore. We brought the car to the resort parking lot and left it there. We didn't want to return it yet, especially since the rentals there were so cheap anyway. The next day, after talking with some of the workers at the resort, who recommended a beautiful nearby cenote to check out, we drove the car to another similar-looking dirt path very close to the resort. We followed the workers' directions and drove all the way to the end of the dirt road, then parked when we saw a sign for the cenote. We found it without issue, and we were the only ones here surprisingly. We didn't see any other cars. We followed the signs down this beautiful scenic pathway. It was a truly peaceful experience that unfortunately had to be ruined when we started feeling like we were being watched. I don't mean we had some sixth sense. I mean we literally heard rustling and footsteps from all around us in the jungle. I told her let's just keep walking. We continued to follow the signs, and out from nowhere, a man came up to us, once again speaking Spanish. When I again responded no hablo español, he started to attempt to speak in English, and I understood him to be trying to tell us to come with him, that he'd lead us to the cenote. Claire and I looked at each other nervously, and we followed the man. He was leading us a different way than we were originally going. It seemed like we weren't following the signs anymore. Claire tapped me on the shoulder and then pointed at the man's back pocket. There was the handle of a large knife in his back pocket. I whispered to her to run, and then pushed her to start running, and I followed close behind. The man noticed and started running after us, but thank the Lord he was slow. We were easily outrunning him. We made it back to the car, and at first I thought he'd stop chasing us, but as soon as we got in the car, 3 people emerged from the path we just came from and tried opening the car doors. They then started hitting the glass trying to break the windows open. Before any of them could actually break the windows, we were already moving. Claire was crying. Hell, I wanted to cry too. 2 days in a row of this. We officially hated this place. We brought the car back to the rental shop, and luckily there weren't any dents or anything from being pounded on, just some dirt stains. We shuttled back to the resort from there, and we didn't leave the resort again until we left days later for the airport. We warned the resort staff about the attack so they could warn the guests. We haven't returned to Mexico since, but I'm honestly not sure if we ever will. Even in what was supposed to be a safer area by the resorts, 2 days in a row we barely escaped being robbed and attacked.
For the clarity of this story, I must mention that I have a hearing disability that has made me hard of hearing. I know that there are some things in life that I'll never understand, but I still look back on this experience wondering what could have happened and what I should have done differently. This all happened around a year ago. The holiday season had just rolled by, and I was settling down from traveling and all the get-togethers with family and friends. I live in a small suburban neighborhood that borders a forest in southern Quebec. It's a quiet area, as most of the residents are familiar with each other, which I honestly kind of prefer as it adds a warmer atmosphere. Around winter, I like to take my dog Monty on walks in the local forest. He's a Rottweiler Husky mix, which is perfect for me since I enjoy going for runs from time to time. The forest has several trails, none of which are challenging for non-hikers. I remember it being an afternoon. I had just finished having a late lunch and decided to burn the calories on a walk with Monty. As usual, my dog goes ballistic when we turn the corner on my street towards the forest entrance. It was relatively cold for a February day. A fresh blanket of snow lined the paths overnight, creating this nearly blank canvas. As usual, I let my dog off the leash so he could run around. There were a few yellow patches along with some boot prints in the snow, which signaled to me that several people had already taken their dogs out earlier. Most people like to go on walks before noon since the sun tends to set around 4 p.m., so I didn't expect to see anybody out at that time. After walking for around 30 minutes, we came to a fork in the path. I noticed that one of the paths hadn't been walked yet, so feeling semi-adventurous, I decided to take it. I have a pretty concrete memory of the trails, so I knew exactly where I was going. The trail led to a clearing, which was great, since I wanted to check out the native birds with the binoculars I had gotten for Christmas. I remember scanning the surroundings until I saw a strange shape along the tree line in the distance. When I focused my binoculars, I saw a blue tarp and what looked to be a makeshift shelter. As curious as I was to check it out, it was getting dark, and I wanted to get home. Turning around, Monty and I started walking back. As usual, he ran up ahead, but something seemed off in his behavior. He was much more alert and was sniffing the trail more than he normally would from what I observed in the past. When I looked down at the trail, my eyes widened. There was a set of footprints in the snow, much larger than my own. I remember turning my boots over out of sheer confusion to compare them to the ones in the snow. The prints were different, which left me with even more questions. There were no other forks in the trail, so whoever took it had to have passed me at some point. I figured they must have passed me while I was using my binoculars. At the time, it seemed like the most logical explanation, so I tried not to overthink it. At this point, it was significantly darker outside, but I could still make out my surroundings. As we were walking back, Monty stopped abruptly and started barking relentlessly in my direction. As I turned around, that's when I saw him. There was a man, probably around 6'4", wearing charcoal-colored snow pants and a white camo jacket only about a meter away from me. He didn't make any movements towards me. He just stood there with his hands in his coat pockets. I didn't recognize him from anybody in the neighborhood, so I assumed he must have been a hiker or someone from out of town. He looked like he was muttering something to me, but I couldn't read his lips due to the lack of lighting and not knowing if he was speaking English or French, which are the two commonly spoken languages in Quebec. I felt like an idiot at that moment for not bringing my phone with me, so I ended up trying to communicate with him that I was hard of hearing and that it was getting late. I got back home around 4:30. By then, it was completely dark out. I remember following my standard night routine, not really thinking much about the encounter, but in the middle of the night, something happened that still shakes me to this day. I woke up to Monty licking my hand, which is something he usually does to get me out of bed in the morning. I tapped my phone to check the time, and to my surprise, it was 3 a.m. I noticed a message from my neighbor asking if everything was all right, which, if I'm being honest, confused me at first. The message was a few minutes old and asked if everything was all right since Monty had been barking like he was possessed. I looked up from my phone to see that Monty was no longer in my room. I walked downstairs to find him barking hysterically at the patio door. As I approached the door, I struggled to see anything with my vision still blurry. I tried to focus my eyes when the motion sensor light turned on. At that moment, my heart sank. The man from the forest was standing there in my backyard. I didn't think twice to process any more questions. I stepped away from the door and texted 911. I don't think I've ever texted 911 faster than I did that night. I ran up to my room with Monty and grabbed the machete from under my bed. I'm a shorter woman with a background in martial arts, but I know damn well that the best move in a fight is to not fight at all. I sat there in my room guarding Monty and myself until the police came. With my heart beating out of my chest, I sat opposite from the door with Monty by my side. It didn't last long until Monty sprang up and started barking violently at the bedroom door. My hands were sweating profusely as I watched a shadow cast in from underneath the door. The movement in front of the nightlight suggested the man was seconds from breaking into my room. Those had to be the longest minutes of my life, as I anticipated the door handle turning or the door completely breaking in. Luckily for me, it never did. When the police arrived, I explained everything to them while they searched the property. The glass on the patio was smashed completely, but besides that, nothing was missing and everything was still relatively the same. The police found the gate in my backyard open. It leads to the forest, which is where they believe the man disappeared to. I let them know about the shelter I saw in the woods the day before. I took Monty and some of my belongings to stay with a family friend for a few days while I got the patio door fixed. I never got a follow-up from the police after the incident, but ever since that day, I decided to stick to roads when walking my dog, not trying to think too much about the incident. My name is Emberley, and I'm a 16-year-old girl who lives in Illinois with my younger sister Kate, who's 15. My dad works for a deforestation group about 30 minutes from our house. It was a normal morning on December 5th as my sister and I were getting ready to go out to the movies. We decided to go watch a somewhat new horror movie, Terrifier 3, which had some Christmas stuff included in it. We all knew it was 18 plus, but nobody paid much attention. Plus, we looked older than we were anyway. We made our way to the movies and easily got in thanks to our appearance. However, halfway through the film, as everyone was anticipating the next scene, my phone buzzed loudly enough for the whole theater to hear, which really killed everyone's vibe as they all turned toward me with annoyed looks. My sister and I scurried out until I tripped, which was embarrassing enough. After we exited the theater, I checked my phone to see who called me. It was my dad, but instead of calling back, I received a text message that said something like, "Hey, would you mind bringing me some lunch since the small cafe in the woods is shut today?" I looked over at Kate, and she looked at me confused, but neither of us second-guessed the message since it seemed normal. We arrived home, packed some food for him, and took my car downtown to the woods. I've always loved that place and never felt uneasy there because it was large and secluded. The scenery was amazing, with a hill that led down to a lake perfect for fishing and photos. After a while, Kate and I got out of the car and we walked down the path through the woods. I took out my phone to call my dad, but he didn't pick up. Confused, I looked over at Kate, who was just as confused as I was. Why wouldn't he respond when he just called us at the movies? I decided to message him instead, reminding him that we were at the woods to give him his lunch. After a few moments, I saw the 3 little dots on the screen appear, showing he was typing. He responded by telling us to walk down the small hill and wait for him at the lake, which we followed. The sun was slowly setting since it was winter, so sunset came much earlier. The sky had a beautiful radiant orange glow over the hill and down the mountain. Snapping out of my thoughts, Kate pointed down to the lake where a man in black was sitting on the deck by the water with his back to us. We guessed it was our dad. We walked down a bit more and stopped a little behind him. I called out his name, but he didn't move. Kate grew uneasy, and her attitude made the scene even more eerie. I slowly pulled off the hood he was wearing and revealed a man who definitely wasn't our dad. Kate and I shrieked as he turned around and began waving my dad's phone around like a maniac, smiling like he was happy to see us scared. I blurted out asking why he was using our dad's phone, but he didn't respond. Instead, he lunged and grabbed Kate's arm as she screamed. Luckily, I was strong enough to pull her away, and we started running as fast as we could. The adrenaline pushed through us so much that I had never seen either of us run that fast. Behind me, I heard stomps getting closer, so I knew we were being chased. I didn't dare to turn around. Finally, we reached the car. I slammed the door shut and locked it as the man came to my window, then crouched down out of sight as I reversed and sped away back home. When we got home, my dad and mom were there. We arrived panting out of breath and explained the whole situation to them. My dad was furious and said his phone had been stolen while he was working, so he decided to come back home. He said the man must have taken his phone and messaged us. My dad called the police and filed the report. They used the IMEI number to track the device, which was still on the deck by the lake, and they returned the phone to my dad. They said there wasn't much they could do since the phone was already found. I thought this was the end of it, but I wouldn't be telling this if it was. 6 hours later, around 1 a.m., I got an unknown message that said, "I like that your house is lit only by your bedroom TV." I immediately went cold and pale. I paused the TV and heard rustling outside my window. My room was on the second floor. I shut my phone and listened. Slowly, I peeked through the blinds and saw the man smiling with a gun pointed at my window. I screamed and pulled away as glass shattered everywhere across my room. My parents ran in, followed by Kate. I screamed for them to crouch and told them the man was outside with a gun. When my dad went to check, the man was gone. Then we heard another loud bang and more glass breaking downstairs in the kitchen. We ran and locked the bedroom as Kate called 911. My mom hugged us as we cried in fear. Throughout the whole situation, I kept wondering how he knew where we lived. A few moments later, the police arrived and searched the whole house, but nobody was there. Kate and I explained the situation again, and one of the officers said they should check the car. Surprisingly, a small air tag was found on my tire, which explained how the man knew where we lived and why he crouched before I sped out of the woods. The police told us they would patrol the streets and do everything they could to find the man. A few months later, he still hadn't been found, but he never returned, which I hope it stays that way. Me, Kate, and my parents are still traumatized by the situation, but mostly I felt stupid as the older sister for not being alarmed when the person didn't respond to calls and only responded through texts. All I know is that I'll be more careful and never go to secluded places again, especially when I'm responsible for someone else's safety. It was 2021. One word to describe my day: hectic. Work was a shit show. This was prime COVID time, so I was working from home. I was supposed to be meeting with my extended family upstate, and I ended up finally getting off a nearly 3-hour Zoom meeting for work a whole hour and a half after everyone else had already arrived at my parents' house. And that didn't include the next 2 hours or so the trek up to their house would take me. I filled up 2 cups of coffee in my kitchen to take with me before leaving. God knew I'd need them. The second I opened my front door, I realized this drive would be more of a shit show than I had originally thought. The snow and wind had already picked up since earlier that evening, and the streets were barely even plowed. The ground had at least 2 feet of snow already, and it was supposed to snow like this for a majority of the night. I had to be driving under 25 on most residential roads. My car at the time was also a really old, crappy Hyundai, which wasn't ideal for extreme weather conditions at all. It didn't have anti-lock brakes either. I'm a fast driver though, so when I got on the highway, I raised my speed to 70, which was probably a lot faster than safe for the conditions. I finally arrived at my parents' house around 9. They had begun dinner without me, but thankfully weren't too far along. A few drinks and gift sharing later, I started to lose track of time. I got so caught up in seeing my relatives I hadn't spoken to in a while that I ended up basically forgetting I still have to drive home, even as most of my family had started to leave. Once I finally got in my car to leave, it was past midnight, and at least another foot of snow had accumulated on the ground. I was buzzed, but I figured I was sober enough to drive home. Not that I condone drinking and driving at all. I was tired and simply wanted to get home. As I was heading towards the highway, I realized the roads were completely dead. I made the grave mistake of raising my speed to 40 down one particular road, because as I began to approach a bend in the road, I realized my car had gone into a skid. I tried not to panic, as this wasn't the first time I'd skidded. I started to steer into the skid and downshifted, but as I got even closer to the curve and my car still wasn't slowing down, I started to panic. My car went straight off the side of the road and into a tree, and the airbag deployed. I was momentarily in shock from the force of the impact, but thankfully, I was relatively unscathed. My car was ruined though. The whole hood was buried in a bank of snow surrounding the tree I hit. No chance I was pushing it back onto the road or anything like that. The first thing I did was phone my roadside assistance company, and they said they'd send a truck to my location, but because of the horrible conditions, it could take up to 40 minutes for the truck to reach me. I was on a deserted road surrounded by forest and no houses for miles in either direction, so I decided to also call my parents and ask one of them to drive over and wait with me. My dad said he'd get in his car and drive over, so then I hung up and waited. As I was sitting there, I began to hear something over the sound of the wind howling outside. There were undeniably footsteps in the snow. I couldn't tell exactly from where, but they sounded somewhat distant. I opened the driver's side door and stepped out, looking over the roof of my car. I wasn't hearing footsteps anymore. Instead, I was hearing some new sounds. It was kind of hard to describe, but it sounded like some kind of wet slurping. I looked over to where I thought the sound was coming from, and I could see some movement by the tree line. It was dark as hell though, but I was pretty certain I was looking at a person. I called out, "Hello?" The sound stopped, but no one called back. I sat there for a few more seconds awkwardly, but no one ever responded or appeared to me. I couldn't see any more movement either. I was officially freaked out, so I got back in my car and locked the doors. What couldn't have been a whole minute later, I heard footsteps in the snow again outside. Then I heard something hitting the passenger side window, like a rock or something was thrown at it. I couldn't see out the passenger side window because it was covered in snow, or any of the windows for that matter. Once again, I opened the driver's side door and stepped out of my car. Checking my immediate surroundings, I made a disturbing discovery. There were boot prints in the snow, circling all around my car, and then leading away from my passenger side door into the woods. I felt sick to my stomach. I also noticed there were drops of blood in the snow. I opened my driver's side door and then grabbed my 9mm out of the glove compartment. Clutching it in my right hand, I began to follow the prints leading into the woods. At that moment, I was convinced someone out there was with me. As I followed the prints, the drops of blood began to grow larger. It looked like someone had been bleeding profusely. And then, I saw some dark mass lying in the snow just past the tree line. I couldn't tell what it was. I was just praying it wasn't a person. I took out my phone and enabled the flashlight. It wasn't a person. It was a dead deer, seemingly slaughtered by some larger, predatory animal. The stomach was ripped completely open, and shockingly, the deer had been completely decapitated. I swept the flashlight over the surrounding few feet, but I didn't see the head anywhere. I decided this was getting too weird for me, and I started heading back to my car. I got back to my car and opened the driver's side door, and as soon as I did, it was all I could do to keep myself from vomiting on the spot. Lying in the driver's side seat of my car was the severed head of a deer, placed on the seat as if it was looking right at me. I booked it out of there and made it a few minutes down the road before headlights appeared in the distance. I ran towards the car, waving my hands and shouting like a madman, still holding my handgun. Thankfully, it was my dad, and he stopped the car and asked me what the hell I was doing. I got in the passenger seat and explained everything to him, and I kid you not, he literally didn't believe me. I felt more comfortable going back to my car with my dad now, so he drove the two of us over there and we got out. The footprints were still all around my car, but the deer head was gone. All that remained was a large spot of blood on my driver's side seat. I think once my dad saw that, he started to believe me. The deer corpse was also gone. All that remained were drag marks in the snow. The tow truck finally showed up, and he towed my car. My dad asked me if I wanted to call the police, but honestly, I just didn't have the energy to file a police report. I was exhausted and just wanted to go to sleep. I figured calling the police wouldn't accomplish jack anyways. So that's my story. I have no idea who was in the woods that night and what they wanted. Maybe they were just trying to scare me, or maybe they had worse intentions. This happened several summers ago when I was still living in my childhood home with my parents. I was 17. One random weekend, my parents went away for a few days without taking me with them, which was pretty much unheard of. They're the kind of people who are always at home, constantly keeping the house in order and rarely ever taking time away for themselves. In all my years living there, I couldn't remember a single time they'd ever gone away together like that. Naturally, I decided to take advantage of the rare opportunity, and I invited over MJ, my girlfriend at the time, to spend the weekend. It felt like a once-in-a-lifetime chance to have the house to myself without any interruptions. MJ had this playful, devious side to her that made every moment feel a little more exciting than it should have been. Admittedly, that's one of the reasons why we didn't work out, but I'm not going to open that can of worms right now. Knowing her, I should have been able to predict what was going to happen that night. As soon as she saw my heated pool glowing away in the backyard, her eyes lit up with a spark of mischief. She told me we should skinny dip, grinning like it was the most obvious idea in the world. I told her my neighbors would see, but she pestered me and made the very good point that we'd probably never get the chance again. We had gone swimming many times, but had never done something that devious before. At least I hadn't. I was always the well-behaved, polite kid growing up. Even now, I sometimes scold myself for being too nice. Anyway, it took a lot of convincing for me to agree, but MJ had a way about her. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and before long, we were in the pool, laughing and splashing under the night sky. It was actually a really romantic moment, as cheesy as that sounds. The water was warm against the cool summer air, and everything felt perfect, almost surreal. Let me quickly describe the house. The pool was right outside the large bay windows that overlooked the living room. Because it was so dark outside and the lights inside were still on, we had a perfect view into the house. It was like looking into a lit-up dollhouse. I'm sorry if that doesn't make sense, but if you saw a picture, you'd get what I'm talking about. For a while, that view made me feel safe, like we were still connected to the house even while we floated outside in our own little bubble. That comfort didn't last long, though. At one point, as MJ was talking about something, I don't even remember what, I glanced up at the windows and froze. I saw the last thing I expected to see. On one of the far living room walls was a shadow. It was faint but distinct, and I knew it was definitely a shadow because of how it was moving. I watched in horror as it moved out of sight, like someone was walking deeper into the house. My heart started pounding. I felt a surge of panic, but I didn't want to scare MJ. I whispered to her that we needed to get out of the pool. She didn't question me. She just quickly followed my lead as I tried to get out of the pool and dry off as discreetly as possible. I told MJ to hide in the pool house, turn off the light, and stay completely silent until I came back. Her playful demeanor was completely gone. I could tell she was freaking out, but she was doing a really good job keeping it together. She nodded and slipped into the pool house without another word. I opened the back door as quietly as I could and stepped into the kitchen. I was going to handle the situation myself. That's just how my parents had raised me. I grabbed a knife off one of the cutting boards and started moving through the house. Someone had definitely been in there. That much was obvious. I started noticing small, subtle signs that didn't make any sense to me. A chair in the dining room was slightly pulled out, like someone had been sitting there. A picture frame on the wall was crooked. A coffee mug I didn't remember using was sitting on the counter. Stuff like that. Stuff that no rational robber would ever waste time doing. As I moved through the house, I started considering the possibility that it wasn't a robber I was looking for. My heart rate must have been insane at that point. I thought I was going to be tackled every 5 seconds, but nothing ever happened. I checked every room on the ground floor, but I didn't find anyone. All the doors were locked, and all the windows were shut tight. It didn't make any sense. If someone had been inside, where were they now? The more I wandered around the house, the more my masculine bravado disappeared. At one point, I just got fed up and decided to call the police. They arrived quickly and did a thorough search of the house and yard, but they didn't find anything either. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the backyard, nothing. They couldn't even come up with a legitimate method of entry. One of the officers suggested I might have scared off whoever it was, but I wasn't convinced. At a certain point, it was too late at night to do much else. The police left. MJ and I were too scared to stay in the house, but we didn't have another option. We locked every door, barricaded the bedroom, and tried to get some sleep. Around 4 a.m., I woke up to the sound of creaking floorboards above me. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the noise was way too obvious. Someone was moving upstairs. I listened for a while longer and started hearing footsteps moving down the stairs, like whoever it was trying to make their way outside. Adrenaline surged through me as I grabbed the knife I'd left on the nightstand. I told MJ to stay put and bolted out of the room. I moved as quickly and as quietly as I could, but by the time I reached the front door, it was wide open. Whoever had been inside was gone. I didn't even bother calling the police again. There was nothing they'd be able to do anyway. I just made sure all the doors were locked and went back to bed. The next morning, the full extent of the intrusion hit me. All of our kitchen knives were missing, all of them, which was definitely not something a rational person would do. They'd also taken smaller items, some cash, a few watches, random electronics, but it was the knives that haunted me. It felt like whoever had been inside had left a message, though I couldn't figure out what it was. When my parents came home and I told them what happened, they were surprisingly understanding. I'm not one to scare easily, never have been, so this experience honestly didn't affect me much. But even now, I still sometimes acknowledge how strange it all was. I was never able to figure out how that person had gotten inside, or where they had been hiding while the police searched the house. This is always going to be one of those odd things that just sticks with a person forever. This happened last year during Hollywood Bash weekend. I go to Rowan University, and for anyone who doesn't know, Holly Bash is Rowan's big spring festival, kind of like our own mini Coachella. It's held every April on Hollybush Green, right near the historic Hollybush Mansion. There are carnival rides, food trucks, lawn games, and a concert with a surprise headliner. The whole campus shows up. It's supposed to be the most fun day of the year. I was a sophomore at the time, and like a lot of other students, I stayed out late that night. Rowan's in a pretty quiet suburban neighborhood. Glassboro doesn't really feel dangerous, even at 2 in the morning. That's probably why I didn't think much of it when I left my friend's dorm and started walking back to Chestnut Hall alone. What I didn't know was that earlier in the night, around 12:30 a.m., a group of masked people, like 10 of them, maybe more, had been seen banging on doors and riding bikes around campus, including outside Chestnut. I personally never saw that firsthand, but apparently it was alarming enough that people were posting about it online while it was happening. I didn't check any of that stuff. I was just trying to get back to my dorm. So it's about 2:30 a.m. I swipe into Chestnut Hall, go inside, and I'm walking towards the stairs when I notice someone sitting in the lounge. That alone isn't weird. It's a college dorm. People are up all the time, but the guy was wearing a mask, not a COVID mask, like a full-on black ski mask, and he wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, dead silent. It took me a second to process. I actually paused near the entrance of the lounge, kind of frozen. It didn't make sense. I had no idea what he was doing there or why he was masked, but it genuinely freaked me out. And then, he jumped off the couch and turned towards me in one quick motion. I didn't even think. I ran down the hall and ducked into the nearest bathroom, locking the door behind me. I must have stayed in there for at least 5 minutes, long enough to hear the hallway go completely silent again. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but my gut was screaming at me. Eventually, I cracked the door open and peeked out. No one was in the hall. I thought maybe he had left. I stepped out. I didn't want to sprint and freak myself out even more, so I just walked toward the other exit. That's when I saw him again. He was still in the lounge, still masked, and this time he was directly across from where I had to walk. His bike was leaned against the door,
and there was a chair wedged between the wall and the frame, like it had been jammed there on purpose. I had pepper spray on my keychain. I pulled it out and held it in front of me. I didn't aim or threaten him. I just showed that I had it, hoping it would be enough. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I walked past him. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't even flinch. It was like he wanted me to see him, like the fear was the whole point. I didn't look back. I pushed the other door open and left the building. I was halfway to Magnolia when I heard the sound of bikes behind me. 3 more masked people rode up next to me. They didn't touch me or try to grab me, but they were heckling me, laughing, saying things I couldn't make out. I know that sounds pretty harmless on its own, but a few of them were waving around what looked like guns, which was the part that freaked me out the most. I guess they could have been fake or airsoft guns even, but it was clear that they were trying to intimidate me. I tried to ignore them, but I could feel how close they were riding, just barely out of arm's reach. I made it to Magnolia and texted my friend to come meet me outside. He walked me back to Chestnut, and that made me feel a lot safer. Luckily, the bikers were gone by then. I didn't call the police that night. I wasn't hurt, but I was really scared. I can't even fully explain why. It wasn't until the next morning that I told my mom everything. She ended up reporting it, and later that night, some of my guy friends texted me that they'd also been approached by a group of masked guys, and a few of them had pulled guns. Nobody was hurt, but it was enough that campus police started taking it seriously. I've heard a lot of rumors about who those guys were. Some people think it was just a bunch of local kids trying to scare people. It's just the gun detail that freaks me out. It's likely that a group of armed, non-students had somehow made their way into my dorm that night, the place I live. I've been scared to walk home alone ever since. This story happened 2 summers ago, back when I was still dating Amanda. I've kept it to myself for a while, not because it's embarrassing or anything, but because I didn't want to risk unintentionally doxing her or her family. Now that we've been broken up for over a year, I think it's safe to talk about it. At the time, Amanda was working as a camp counselor for a summer program in the city. It wasn't exactly close to home, about a 25-minute drive from her quiet, wealthy suburban neighborhood. But she loved the job for reasons I still don't fully understand. I always thought it was a little beneath her, especially considering her aspirations in life, but I wasn't going to be a jerk and outright say that. Her house was exactly what you'd picture for a family in that kind of area. Big yard, 3 stories, high ceilings, and enough space to host just about any event. That's why when the camp counselors were deciding where to host their end of summer party, Amanda's house was the obvious choice. I'm probably making it sound like that was the first time she hosted camp-related parties, but that's not really the case. It just so happened that it was my first time experiencing one since I hadn't been dating her the previous summer. Her parents were out of town that weekend. They were always out of town, really. I don't want to get too deep into it out of respect, but Amanda's family dynamic was odd. Her relationship with her parents more closely resembled that of 3 colleagues rather than 3 family members. Everything was very transactional, and it was blatantly obvious to any onlooker that all 3 of them were versions of the same narcissistic, insecure person, even though they despised being compared to each other. That description's honestly a little harsh. Her dad was pretty chill, and I honestly missed the guy. But, you know, feelings. Anyway, the party was packed. Dozens of people crowded into the house and spilled out into the backyard. The vibe was lively and fun, and most of the guests were friendly and easygoing. Well, except for one guy, Pete. From the moment he showed up, I had a bad feeling about him. He was loud, overly confident, and spent way too much time talking to Amanda. It wasn't just small talk either, it was full-on flirting. He wasn't even trying to hide it. I felt disrespected, but I didn't want to make a scene. Amanda and I had been dating for a while, and while I trusted her most of the time, she had a bad habit of being a little too friendly with other guys. It was a sore spot in our relationship, and I knew bringing it up would only cause problems. I didn't want to come off as insecure, so instead of confronting Pete directly, I came up with a different plan. I started acting overly friendly toward him. Every time he finished a drink, I offered him another.
We talked, laughed, and before long, Pete was drinking faster than he probably should have been. I don't exactly have the build of a heavy drinker, but the Irish and Mexican in my blood means my alcohol tolerance is always going to be absurdly high. My plan was to get him so wasted that he either made a fool of himself and the problem took care of itself, or he fell asleep and the problem took care of itself. It was a win-win. I was kind of surprised to discover that my plan had actually worked, and sooner than expected too. By midnight, he was passed out on the basement couches, drooling into a pillow. I was smug about it, but Amanda saw right through me. She accused me of doing it on purpose, which I denied. After some tense back and forth, I finally admitted that I may have played a small role in it. We argued a little, but it wasn't anything serious. Just another disagreement to add to the pile. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that my petty stunt had put a damper on the night. As the party wore on, the house got louder, messier, and more chaotic. I needed a break, so I stepped outside to get some air. The driveway was cool and quiet, a nice contrast to the noise inside. I was leaning against Amanda's car, just staring up at the stars, when I noticed someone standing at the far edge of the property. The figure was motionless, just standing there in the dim glow of one of the street lamps. I squinted, trying to make out who it was. When they didn't move, I decided to approach them. It was probably the liquid confidence that made me do it. I don't think I would have done it otherwise. I asked, "Hey, can I help you?" trying to sound friendly, but a little assertive. The figure took a few slow steps towards me before stopping. It was definitely a man, that much I could tell, but I couldn't make out any notable features since it was so dark. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he asked, "Are your parents home?" The question threw me off. It wasn't just what he asked, it was how he said it, like he already knew the answer. Before I could respond, he repeated his question, this time name-dropping Amanda's parents. He knew who they were. That was enough to turn the unease I'd been feeling into full-blown suspicion. I lied and told the guy my parents were inside, even though part of me thought he knew I didn't live there and that I was lying. Still, I thought maybe I could deter him from doing whatever he was gonna do. The guy nodded and just said okay, before turning and walking away. I expected him to head to a car or another house, but he didn't. Instead, he walked straight down the street, disappearing into the darkness. I watched him for as long as I could, but it was too dark to tell where he went. Something about it didn't sit right with me, but I tried to brush it off. I went back inside and ended up in the basement playing ping pong with a few other people. Amanda had a pool table upstairs, so most of the crowd was up there, leaving the basement quieter. I didn't feel like being my usual fun, social self, so I preferred the quieter atmosphere where I could actually hear people talking. At some point, I heard the doorbell ring. At first, I didn't think much of it. This was a party after all, so people coming and going wasn't anything out of the ordinary. But something in my subconscious was tugging at my brain, like there was something I was missing. As I stood there, mindlessly slapping a ping pong ball around, I realized what it was. Amanda had instructed everyone to come through the back door, which didn't even have a doorbell. That meant someone had come up to the front door, which wasn't supposed to happen. I excused myself from the game and headed upstairs, knowing I was probably overreacting, but wanting an answer. As I walked past Amanda's room, I noticed she was passed out on her bed, completely oblivious to the chaos around her. That's when it hit me. I was probably the only somewhat sober person left in the house. I turned her bedroom light off and gently shut her door, trying not to disturb her. When I got to the front door, a girl named Bella was standing there. I asked if she knew who had rung the doorbell. She was belligerently drunk, so getting a coherent response out of her was about as easy as getting one out of a squirrel. That girl was also pretty brain-dead sober, which didn't help matters. Eventually, she said that there was some old guy at the door who claimed to be a family friend and needed to return something he borrowed. In response to that, I yelled, "You let him in?" She shrugged her shoulders and walked away, presumably to go spin the roulette wheel on which random guy she would be bringing home that night. I ran upstairs to Amanda's parents' room, and my worst fears were confirmed. Drawers were pulled open, jewelry boxes were empty, and the closet looked like it had been ransacked. That guy had robbed them. I figured he was already gone. I mean, the jewelry boxes were empty, the drawers were ransacked. It looked like he had taken what he had come for. I was about to head back downstairs when I noticed something move in the mirror on the back of the door. It was just a quick shift, like someone ducking out of view behind me. I turned around, but I wasn't fast enough. The guy tackled me before I even saw his face. He knocked the wind out of me as the two of us hit the ground, and I couldn't breathe. The guy started clawing at my shirt like he was trying to rip it off of me. With all the strength I had, I managed to push him off, but it was more panic than strength. He got up and sprinted straight across the room, dove out one of the open windows, and landed on the roof with a thud. I ran to the window just in time to see him drop into the side yard and take off running. I didn't chase him. I wouldn't have been able to catch him anyway. I just stood there, trying to process what had happened and catch my breath. The damage was done. He was gone. But the encounter took its toll. I didn't want to stay up any longer and chaperone everyone. I didn't want to be the guy to kick everyone out either, though. So I actually called the police and told them to help me kick everyone out. Most of the local officers knew Amanda's family, so it wasn't like they were going to arrest anyone or do anything drastic. The cops came and kicked everyone out, and I secretly thanked them for their help. After they left, I went downstairs, slapped Pete awake, and told him he had to find some way home. He threw up before calling an Uber. The next morning, Amanda had no choice but to call her parents and tell them what had happened. They were furious, as anyone would be, but Amanda didn't seem to care. She had always been rebellious, brushing off authority like it was beneath her. They didn't even bother calling the police. The house had no cameras, and they figured it would be a waste of time. I'm still not sure how that guy knew Amanda's parents weren't home. Part of me thinks whoever robbed them knew them in some capacity. Looking back, that night revealed more about Amanda than I wanted to admit. Her indifference, her carelessness, it was all a red flag I should have taken more seriously. Hindsight, as they say, is 20/20.